Mask theater, yes. But you said, you know, because you have the antibodies, you shouldn't even be forced to wear a mask in a mask mandate. Explain.
Well, because you have, your body has endured a COVID infection and you fought it off successfully. Hooray, as probably 99% of humanity does. Yay. Your body is equipped now immunologically to fight off that invader should it return. And of course, you know, our bodies are bombarded by viruses. So will you be exposed to COVID again? Almost assuredly. But
so if I'm exposed again,
you won't get
I'm not contagious.
No.
Because if I can't, if I've had it, I can't carry it. Even though I can't get it, I can't even carry it.
Well, that's right, because if the virus, or when, let's say the virus enters your body again, it will immediately be recognized by your immune system, and the virus will be fought off. Any cells that might harbor it will be destroyed quickly. So you will not, your body will not, the overwhelming likelihood at least. There are some questions surrounding reinfection. Yes, there are. And coronaviruses are known for their shape-shifting.
Right.
But for all intents and purposes, certainly in the current environment, it's reasonably safe to assume that you would fight off a new infection quite quickly, and the virus wouldn't have the opportunity to multiply in the lining of your nose and throat the way it does when it's in that contagious phase.
Okay. Dr. Hayworth, how far away are we from herd immunity? Because we hear this term thrown around. Almost everyone I know has had COVID.
Right.
What is that percentage? What does that look like? And how far away are we by your best estimation? I know you can't say for sure, but give us an idea.
Absolutely. Well, the concept of herd immunity means that there are enough of us in a population that the virus simply won't go spreading from one to the next in the same way it does when no one's been exposed. Because there are enough people who won't contract an infection that the virus will just land with a thud, so to speak, you know, and that means that there's just less risk of any of us having the virus, letting it replicate in our systems and being contagious. The proportion of people that we need to consider ourselves to have herd immunity varies with how contagious the virus is. So it's thought with COVID, it's probably somewhere around, at a minimum, 60 to 70% of the population. Really? So it's a pretty good-sized number. There really probably isn't any place in the country that's reached herd immunity, but what we're going to find is that different areas of the country where there have been the biggest waves will probably reach herd immunity first. And there may even be some communities in the country where we have herd immunity. How do we prove that? How do we know whether or not that's happening? Well, because we test for the presence of antibodies. So we look and see, you know.
What does that test look like? Is that a blood test?
It's a blood test.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a blood test that will, and there are a couple of different antibodies that the body generates, a couple of different types. So what we're looking for is something called IgG, which is an antibody that your body makes after several days of the infection, and then, you know, in very large quantities when you're immediately fighting the infection, and then, you know, the numbers trail off. And in fact, there are definitely concerns about how long those antibodies actually are produced in sufficient numbers within our bodies after a coronavirus infection to, you know, sustain that immunity for a long period of time. But the good news is an extraordinary effort led by President Trump, Operation Warp Speed, to develop not just one vaccine, but probably several vaccines for this virus, is proceeding at an unprecedented
Warp speed.
Pace in human history. Exactly. Well, it is. No, exactly.
Yeah.
And I used the term warp speed before it became known as Operation Warp Speed, as many of us did. So I'm hopeful, cautiously optimistic, that we will have a vaccine by the latter fall.
So if people like myself who have had COVID, who have antibodies, should they get the vaccine?
No, you don't need to.
Okay. And
I mean, we may determine that as we survey the population immunologically, what I was alluding to, by the way, in terms of surveying, is that, you actually, as a public health effort, invite folks to come in and be tested to see if they have the antibodies so that we can see what kind of prevalence do we have within.
And the president has said he will not make the vaccine mandatory, I believe.
Right.
But has the virus mutated at this point? Because I know people who had it early seems to have been somewhat more severe than the people who've had it more recently, like myself.
Right. Yes. The virus actually is constantly mutating because
and
there are
mutating usually means getting weaker in the case of a virus like this?
It depends.
It
honestly,
depends.
Yeah, mutating means that, viruses are, they're like little bots, basically. They only live if they have an animal host, basically, or another organism as a host. But they're made up, these little bots are made up of lots of different parts that get assembled. I mean, it's quite remarkable that this happens. But there are all kinds of little changes that can occur in little bits of these parts that may not affect the behavior of the virus at all, or may render it not infectious, certain strains, and then of course they fall off the radar screen, or may make it more infectious or more severe. So, one of the concerns surrounding the origin of this coronavirus is that studies were done, and frankly, in which the United States participated in funding and in some of the research, so-called gain-of-function studies that were done in the period around 2014, 2015, to see if the virus could be engineered to give it certain properties that might make it more dangerous in an effort to anticipate possibly the creation of a bioweapon. So there are all kinds of ways that this virus can change in nature and even through engineering. I'm not suggesting that this is an engineered virus, by the way, but these viruses can definitely change for the better or the worse. And we can follow that along.
Generally speaking, when a virus mutates, it gets weaker, and when a bacteria mutates, it gets stronger, or no?
Not necessarily. No. In fact, I mean, yes, they can be less virulent. They can make us less sick. But they can be worse and make us more sick. That's why we worry about bacterial resistance, for example.
Right, which I want to talk to,
sure.
because this is something that I want to make sure that our audience understands. So as we are using all of the hand sanitizers and things,
okay, they are much further down the road in this avenue of religious liberties than we are. But they got there by the same type of things that we are beginning to see here in the U.S. with rewriting our history, tearing down our monuments, going after, it is an elevation of the state to replace God, really. And that's what now they have in China, where there is an outright attempt to re-educate people to acknowledge that the state in itself is God. Now, we're not there, but we are seeing some of those seeds that grow into this type of end result have very much been planted or in process of being planted here in the United States. And we cannot afford to be silent on these issues. Dave, we cannot be silent as to what's happening in China, nor can we be silent as to what's happening right now in the United States, that as it relates to all our liberties, our freedoms, our First Amendment rights, and so forth. If we do not stand firm on those issues, the end result will be just as horrific as it is in China and other places in the world. We must stand for those basic principles.
Gotcha. Thank you very much, Congressman Jody Hice. Thank you. It's very good.
Very good.
All right, over to Warren Davidson, Ohio. Warren, business background, MBA, production, supply chains. Where is it that we went so far off track when our MBA schools say put 100% of supply chains for pharmaceuticals abroad and other manufacturing? You know that industry. How did we get here?
Well, China RX details this with respect to the medical supply chain and pharmaceuticals really nicely. A great book, solid author, and really good recommendations on a course of action to correct it. But you go back more broadly, post the Cold War with the Soviet Union, the United States really didn't develop a grand strategy. Largely, though, what did happen, China was ready to insert themselves into the void. And it's been great for China. And as part of that, the Clinton administration helped create and structure the World Trade Organization. As part of that, China got special status as a developing economy. And that was true back in the 90s. They've developed pretty nicely. They're the second largest economy in the world now, right? And as part of that, they agreed to be a market economy. 0 countries in the world recognize China as a market economy. Every single trading partner would say the same things. They subsidize, they dump to steal market share, they block market access in violation of WTO commitments. And then if you do happen to put anything in there, they work to take it over and still prevent the actual market access from happening. They steal intellectual property, not just in China, but all over the world. They've got a whole of country approach to doing this with their entire economy. And meanwhile, the World Trade Organization is set back, complacent. Donald Trump was calling this out before he was president. He called it out during the campaign, and he's worked hard to deal with it in China. Frankly, the biggest issue has been, frankly, now the rest of the world, the blinders are off. Countries like France said, hey, if you want protective equipment, just agree to use Huawei as your 5G provider. And they're like, who would do that? China would do that. That's who would do that. There's no delusion anymore as to the nature and character of China's approach to dominating global trade. When they talk about one belt, one road, you see what they're doing to small economies in Africa, for example. But they're ready to do it to the rest of the planet. And so we really urgently have to either reshape the WTO or replace the WTO. And we need to really do that with an alliance that says, you know, you're more likely to win a war when you multiply your allies than when you multiply your enemies. We really do need to embrace that and deal with it. And if they won't, then okay, fine. But we're not going to be drugged there as the United States of America by complicit countries.
With the, I'm curious on your constituents in Ohio, kind of the manufacturing hub that lost a lot of jobs, same as Southern Virginia, where I am. And, you know, kind of Trump ran on the forgotten man and woman of flyover country versus the coastal elites. And there's still huge pain and pushback, right? As these supply chains come back, no one can do that instantly. So there's going to be some pain on Wall Street. They're going to be screaming. And Mnuchin's a little slower than Pompeo and the rest of them to come full on with this decoupling from China. But in your district, how do you view the coastal elites? And is the message getting all the way through in Ohio that, hey, we got to deal with China so that everyone understands it, or is it just starting to warm up?
No, Ohio was saying this all along, right? They were being ignored, whether it was Obama or McCain or Romney, people saying, well, those jobs aren't coming back, right? And Donald Trump said, they're coming back, and we're going to fight for them. And perfectly calibrated for states like Ohio, states like Michigan, Wisconsin, Western PA, you know, the quote, Rust Belt. Well, it's not rusty. We're manufacturing innovators. We still make more than ever in the United States of America, but we've lost a lot of edge to China. Right. Our companies can compete against any company in the world, but they shouldn't have to compete against a nation state. Right. And meanwhile, our nation state has been handcuffing us. And if you look, the same is true for energy production in the United States. You look at the, you know, we've got Congressman Perry back there. He's talked a lot about the endangerment finding. And who wants it? The Saudis want it, the Russians want it, the Chinese want it, anything to weaken our economy and frankly weaken our currency. And so we need to work hard. The heartland of America, the message Donald Trump ran on resonates with them, and frankly, it's time for deeds, not words on this. And they've been very pleased with those results with the trade deals, and we got a long ways to go. We should really accelerate this and build on the momentum while we have everyone's attention about how critical the supply chain is.
Right. Congressman Ted Budd, Carolina, businessman, Attorney General Barr gave a powerful speech a week ago, and he talked about businesses that are doing too much collaboration and collusion with China. Better wake-up call for American business, et cetera. This week, Pompeo on the international scene gives a powerful speech. Action, not word. We're starting to take actions, right? And then Houston, Texas, taking action, not words. Are the folks in your district, are they paying attention to these key speeches? Do they see what's going on the world stage and how it impacts them?
Absolutely, and I could tell you a story about a very sizable business, multiple generations, been in business over 100 years, and now I think this is a great warning to other businesses who haven't had this problem. They make pipe. You might look under your kitchen sink or under your bathroom sink and you see their brand in there. Right. Well, they don't manufacture in China, but their logo, their schematics, their imprint was on pipe being produced in China.
Wow.
I mean, complete intellectual theft.
Yep.
And we've had to go, or assist them in their battle and saying, look what China is doing to this this domestic company. And so I think that's a warning to other companies. So we're definitely seeing it.
Right, and kind of the U.S., there is a freedom alliance brewing out there. That's new. So Trump runs on this America First thing, and people say, well, this isn't going to go good. America's just self-interested and looking at their own self-interest. And it turns out now we've got India and Australia and the U.K. and sub-Saharan African presidents all yelling at China now. Yeah. And so on the world scene, it's kind of ironic. We do America First. And I think everyone's starting to see the deceit, the way China's been treating the sub-Saharan Africa, the Horn of Africa, just with contempt. And that, hey, these Americans, maybe they're not perfect, but they're our allies. How can you comment?
Well, you could see the predatory lending, if you would. I mean, they would loan, realizing that this nation state wouldn't be able to pay them back, and therefore they could take control of a port. And we're seeing how hostile their intent ultimately is. We realize, and first of all, I think we need to go back and realize this is not against the people of China. This is against the Chinese Communist Party. So we need to make a big distinction there, and that is our enemy, and the Chinese Communist Party is not a force for good. And those who lost 140,000 lives and family members related to them, that's who they can blame. I mean, we can look to the Chinese Communist Party for withholding information, blaming, even at one point, it was a very feeble attempt, but they blamed our U.S. military for this coronavirus. Now, that fell like a lead balloon. It was completely false, but we realized it's the Chinese Communist Party that is our enemy here.
Right. Thank you guys very much. I've been looking over my shoulder, and some of you, we got a little inside joke in the Freedom Caucus. The most dangerous place in D.C. is anywhere between the president of the Freedom Caucus, head of the Freedom Caucus, Andy Biggs, and a camera. And so he's itching to get up here with a few other brothers. So, gentlemen, thank you very much.
Dave.
Trade in your mics, and thank you for serving this country of ours. Thank you, guys. Give them all a round.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dave.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Thank you, brother. All right, you guys just were in for a treat. We got 4 other congressmen coming out representing other parts of our great country. And at this point, I just want to say special thanks again to President Falwell and Charlie Kirk for all they've done, their vision for the Falkirk Center, putting this event together, streaming it across the country. For those watching out there, we're streaming this via C-SPAN, America's Voice, Fox News, et cetera. We'll be doing the same thing all day tomorrow. Go out to the Falkirk Center on Facebook, and you'll see our agenda there. You'll be able to stream through your computers. If you're media and you're listening in, we have media friends all around the country sharing our stream. You can just go out to that link and use that stream to throw it out to your network. And we want to thank Ryan Helfenbein, the director of the Falkirk Center, for putting on this production. Jared Vallerini, I don't think he's in the room right now. Christian Lasfall, just all the support in the back to run this program we've had today. It's just been inspiring hearing from the leaders of our country. And we're in for a fight, but it's a good fight. And we have folks like this coming on the stage to be in that fight with. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you, Chuck. You heard that? This is, hey, how are you?
Greetings. Always good to see you, Dave.
Good. All right, Congressman, we'll just start on the end there with the chairman of the Freedom Caucus. You've seen him on Fox News every day, and he was the head of the Senate in the state he's from. He has this strategery mindset. Is that an old word from somewhere? In other words, he's very smart. And so, Andy Biggs, give us your wisdom. What's the Freedom Caucus doing on China? What should we be doing? How can the American people help in this fight against China? And are we at war with China?
Yeah, so people need to quit thinking of China as a peaceful economic adversary or economic opponent. That's certainly not what they are. They're not an economic competitor. China has, over the last essentially 25 years, moved itself away from a full-on communist economy to some kind of a hybridization of the economy while maintaining the same type of communist authoritarian rule that they'd had going back to Mao and then through Deng Xiaoping, et cetera. So what we need to do, in my estimation, and Freedom Caucus really hasn't taken a formal position on this, but I think what we need to do is look back at some of the trade restrictions that we had in place when we were in a Cold War with Russia, and actually pre-Clinton era China. So the reason I say that is because if you look at the Blue Water Navy that China has today and was building up, we gave that to them. If you look at the high-tech rocket telemetry that they have, which allows for missiles, etc., we gave that to them.
Right, excellent.
You moved to, yeah, you want me to move on? You want me to, is that enough? You want me to stay?
Keep a roll.
Okay. The point is you start taking a look at their middle class, we built that. Yep. You look at the intellectual property theft that they've done. We've sat idly by while that's happened. We've refused to engage. The thing that President Trump has done so well is actually by using and utilizing the economic sanctions that he has done. That's been marvelous. So I would say you want the trade, you want to control the trade better. You want the economic sanctions, and you want those to be also personalized the way we've done with Russia and certain other areas around the world, in Iran, for instance. And then I think you need to actually encourage what's going on in India. So right now you actually have a hot war going on between India and China. It's just nascent, but it's hot. It's in the northern border there. So what you need to do is you need to not necessarily encourage a war, but you need to encourage the balancing structure that I'm a realist, and as a realist I believe that everybody moves to balance. You've got India, you move right on over to the Southeast Asian tigers, right through Indonesia, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, et cetera, Philippines. You roll right up Taiwan and Japan and South Korea. You could actually contain China and let those in the region contain them. We need to be working on that, strengthen the ANZUS relationship as well. So that's probably shooting off pretty
that's right on the money. And the folks in your district, where are they at on this issue? Do they know? Are they following the issue? Do they know the basics on what China has done, and that we're in some sense at war with them, at least an information technology war?
Yeah, they're very much aware of jobs and loss of jobs, et cetera. So we've actually seen factories come back from China that had gone over there. So they're aware of that. I don't think it is the top issue. I think the top issue in this country, of course, is how you respond to the Wuhan virus, how you respond to the lockdowns and the economic difficulty that we had. And in Arizona, we're a border state, so we're still concerned with immigration. We're concerned with the cross border transmission of the viruses, the human trafficking and drug trafficking going on as well.
Right, Chairman Andy Biggs, thank you very much.
Thank you.
For the words.
Thank you, Dean Brett.
Hey, thank you, brother. Very nice, very nice. We have General Scott Perry, and he's on the Foreign Relations Committee in Congress, and so he's been tracking China for a while. I'm just going to give you carte blanche. What do you got for us, General?
Well, we might not be at war with China, but China's been at war with us for a long time. And of course, they fashion it a lot of different ways. It's been outlined in a book that many people might not be aware of, Unrestricted Warfare. It's not only, as a matter of fact, they actually don't prefer a hot war. They prefer an economic war, which they've been engaged in a long time. And just thinking about some of the questions that Chairman Biggs answered, I mean, I think that people in my district are starting to get it, but let's face it, the United States government has lied to the American people for the balance of 40 years about a relationship with China, and that they were a strategic competitor, not what they really are. And you know, whether it's the coronavirus out of Wuhan and their actions in that regard, or the theft. I was listening to the things that Andy rattled off. I mean, we've given them some of that stuff, but they've taken They've taken a whole lot of stuff, and we've opened the door over and over and over again. And so it is way, way beyond time for the United States to shut that door and recognize China's. And it's important, I think, in this discussion, I think probably all of us would agree, it's important to differentiate between the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese people, right? The Chinese Communist Party was put into power with the assistance of the United States, by the way, in the late 40s and the 50s. And so we need to recognize that and then treat them accordingly. And I really think of China as like a thugocracy. It is a criminal organization that runs, geographically runs, you know, this whole group of people, which is a country. But that's how we need to see it. Now, you know, I'm working on a lot of things, and I think a lot of folks here are. For instance, we want to name the Chinese Communist Party a transnational criminal organization, because that opens up the whole panoply of things to not only the United States, but the international criminal courts. And that's who they are. When we look at what happened in Nazi Germany and say never again, but allow the things that are happening in Western China right now, I mean, you can't just say, well, it's inconvenient because we have such economic ties, right? Every single little town in Pennsylvania had one or two industries when I was growing up. And over the course of my lifetime, all of them have gone. And most of them have gone to China. There's a reason for that. We have allowed it. We have enabled it. And now it's way beyond time to recognize who they are and take the same actions you would against any other criminal organization, which means tough actions and very strident actions. It means, like the chairman said, it means sanctions, but it also means holding people accountable. Yep. The Chinese Communist Party is guilty of egregious things. And we can't tolerate that, whether it happens in China or whether it happens at the UN. And the United States has to take the lead on this because no one else can.
Awesome. Thank you, General Perry. I'm going to head over to our Congressman Randy Weber from Texas. I think I just want to kind of follow up on that logic and just ask our folks in your district, are they convinced that we're in an information economic war with China? Are they following this issue? And are they ready to take action? Or are they still just kind of, look, the American people have a strong dose of the Judeo-Christian ethos in them. And they have a hard time staring at what the general's saying. These folks are doing some of the stuff that the Nazis did, that Mao did, and the Cultural Revolution go back. We have a hard time stomaching that. How are folks looking at it in Texas?
Well, in my district, Dave, thanks for being here, and happy birthday, too, by the way.
You, brother.
You betcha. When I give him a hand. When I get his age, I hope I'm able to sit up here and do stuff like this. However, my folks in Texas, let me tell you, and I appreciate what my colleagues have said. You remember way back when the Islamic Jihad was decapitating Christians overseas? A lot of people said the United States ought to get involved, and then there were some of the wimps that said, no, we don't want another war, we don't want this, we don't want that. I said, look, there's some of my good old boys back in my district that'll volunteer to go over there and behead those terrorists. Let me just tell you, they're sick of it, David. They're absolutely sick of it. And I'm so proud of our president for recognizing that. I'm so proud that he took us out of the World Health Organization, for example. And by the way, you mentioned UN, General. We ought to be out of the UN, too, as far as I'm concerned. Take the UN out of the U.S. and the U.S. out of the UN, because they're anti-Israel most of the time. I will tell you that my district understands what's at stake with the Chinese. We're a strong manufacturing district. Out of 435 members of Congress, we are the 13th largest exporting district in the country. My three coastal counties of the Texas Gulf Coast. I'm proud that the president has recognized that, talking about tariffs and other things. You saw him, and the thieving and the lying and the spying that they're doing. You saw him close down the consulate in Houston here the other day. Of course, the Chinese retaliated by closing down their consulate. Oh, poor babies, that made me really feel bad for us. You're watching the Chinese not only do the kinds of thing in technology that you're talking here, but in space. There's a space race going on, and thank God the president had the foresight to initiate the Space Force that we've passed now. And listen, make no mistake, and I hope y'all are listening out here, when China gets their own space station, they will weaponize it. They will absolutely weaponize space to where they can take down our satellites. They're already on that track right now. They have the technology. So my people in my district in Texas absolutely get what's at stake. One of the bills I've got is H.R. 6388, which actually directs the National Space Council to do a study on China and all of the ill effects and ill attempts it's trying to make on the technology business as it relates to space. We are watching this with great degree of interest. Johnson Space Center is half a mile north of my district. And I'll finish up by saying one thing. You're right, Scott, that we're not necessarily in a Cold War, and we don't have a war with the people of China. It is their government. The PRC, that everybody knows as the People's Republic of China, actually, in my opinion, stands for pretty radical criminals. So it's time that we took them to task and made them accountable.
Yeah, I think it's coming full steam. The last panel talked about the 4 big speeches from the Secretary Pompeo, A.G. Barr, et cetera. So, Congressman Green, why don't you just share, you've got a military background, you know the intelligence, and
Sure.
To what extent are we at war? China's declared they're at war, like General Perry said, in 1999. A couple colonels in the Chinese army that were prescient, now they're generals. Are we at war? Are the American people ready to face this?
Yeah, I think the way we have to look at this, Dave, and thanks for having me here today, is to put some structure around the discussion. And the way I like to look at it is use the DIME paradigm, D for diplomatic, I for informational, M for military, and E for economic. And we're pretty much confronted by them and confronting them in every single one of those. You look diplomatically, the way they manipulated the World Health Organization, the way they refused to obey the courts that ruled those islands are not theirs. Informationally, the cyber war, the intellectual property theft, they hacked military personnel records, hacked our sub bases. You look at the military side, they're in Djibouti, they've got their own forward deployed base. There are massive increases in both their capability and the number of their military forces, intentionally set up to deny us access to parts of the world. And then economically, their IP theft has destroyed billions of dollars off of our GDP, and it's that GDP which fuels our military, which allows us to provide security to the world. On every one of those categories, we're being confronted, and we need to be confronting back. I've got 3 bills, if I could share them real quick, that address some of this stuff. Number one, we got to get the manufacturing back. So I've got a bill that expenses any company that moves from China back to the United States 100% of the cost of the move. Another bill is they're buying up distressed companies that have a national security impact. So what we're doing is we've got a bill, I have a bill that creates basically an investment guarantee. So if American investors buy those distressed companies, there's some backing for it. So that China isn't buying a company that helps our tanks work or whatever. And then I've got another bill that we send a lot of money to this Wuhan lab. I know Scott mentioned it earlier. We don't know exactly, and the American people don't know how many American dollars go to China. We need a transparency bill on every one of those dollars. So.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I got one more question. Andy Biggs, you're the chairman of the crew, and you get the chance to do some bipartisan work, whatever's left in that realm. But lately, the Democrats in the Senate, 98-0 on this thrift savings plan thing, right? Defunding from our investment, your retirement funds, military retirement funds, we're investing weapon systems aimed at us, Chinese weapon systems. Is there any, do you have any word on bipartisan legislation that may go further than that, like the auditing of China's firms through the SEC, which they're not right now? Is there any other good news coming down the pike?
I'd like to give you some good news, but I'm not hearing a lot of good news. I mean, there should be auditing. Yeah. They should be treated like American companies, and that's the advantage. But I would just tell you that if I can just say internationally, there might be some good news. I mean, that is to say that. So you got the multilateral institutions that are not happy with China, particularly in that region. They're very upset about what the ruling that came out that China had no right to ownership or title of the Spratly Islands in the South China Sea. The problem that we're facing is that China is such a behemoth over there the Philippines, they're afraid to take them on. In fact, the leader there said, well, we're going to go one way or the other. We just don't know quite which way we're going to go yet. And you're dealing with Vietnam, which has had to deal with the Chinese for millennia, actually. So, but the good news is, I think those states on an international front have really kind of had it with China's, if I could say, bellicosity, their bullying in the area. And the other thing too is this move by China to become to make the yuan the international currency of exchange, which is one thing that helps us, since we're going to be heading about 30 trillion in national debt pretty soon. Is that's not being bought into by a lot of those in the region, and that's important for us. So those are good news. Yeah. But when you get back to our colleagues across the aisle, if we could somehow convince them that it wasn't Russia, but that it was China, right? You know, that it was China that was the issue instead of Donald Trump, we might get some action.
Right. Yeah, and the Foreign Affairs Committee, I mean, my whole time in Congress, we've had bills or amendments to rein in China, and we can get no support from the other side. They're in the majority right now, and they could run the table on all this stuff, and still, I mean, Foreign Affairs Committee, we're actually passing some amendments in the Transportation Committee regarding reining China in, but not on the Foreign Affairs Committee. Well, it's ridiculous.
Right. If I could jump in here, Dave, I'm on the Select Committee for the coronavirus.
Yep.
Columbia University just said 61% of our casualties could have been prevented had China alerted us just 1 week sooner. Right. That's about 85,000 dead Americans because China didn't. And we cannot get the Select Committee on the Coronavirus to look at China as a potential cause.
I think this is what we can do: just talk to the world, get it out. And so I thank you, gentlemen, for being with us today with the Falkirk Center. It was an honor serving with you all. We had great leadership, but thank you for continuing that, Andy Biggs, and the rest of you guys. We're all singing from the same songbook here when it comes to China. The American people, I think, are behind us. So there's a few elites that are in the way, and we gotta win the war. All right, thank you, brothers. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you.
We got a few more guys coming right on up, so hold on in, and we're good.
Thanks.
Thank you, brother.
And that's a wrap for today's Freedom Summit. What did you think of it?
Look, every day on the War Room, we talk about action, action, action. And it's really just encouraging and inspiring to see so many people coming here today and talking about the action that they are taking right now and the actions that they intend to take in the coming days, whether it's congressmen, whether it's senators, whether it's groups, whether it's think tanks. People here, as I say, we're between the White House and Capitol Hill, the prime position in Washington, D.C., to understand everything that's going on right now as it pertains to the CCP, as it pertains to confronting America's enemies, both domestic and abroad. And it's just so encouraging because oftentimes, and I'm sure you feel the same way, and in fact, I want to pose this question to you. Oftentimes it feels like we're alone in this fight. Yeah. We can fire off tweets or write articles or host shows and do interviews, and you go home at night and you just think, oh my goodness, please let it just not be me. But it's clear it's not just us. There's a whole army of people right here, right now, fighting for the American people and for the Western civilization. I've been so grateful for it. How about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's, when you see the profile of some of these true warriors and what they've sacrificed and continue to sacrifice, and how really courageous so many of these fights have been. It's very inspiring, and I think it's motivating. The reasons that people. One of my favorite questions is, what motivates you to get out of bed in the morning? And people's reasons are so different, but also inspiring. And I think it is what unites us. I want to say as Americans, although we're not, I guess, an American.
Honorary, at least.
Very honorary. But it is. And I take honestly, a special sort of pride in people like you who you understand, and you and I talked about this in one of our very first in-depth meetings. I think we met over at the Navy field, right?
Navy Yard.
Yeah.
The Navy Yard.
And we had a conversation about, as America goes, so goes.
Dave, I think it's a combination. One,
they call it for what it is.
Yep.
This came out of China.
Yep.
This wasn't something that came from North Carolina or Virginia or Florida.
Right.
It came from China. It's pretty well proven for that. Secondly, it's given them a bigger awareness of the issues that we face that they didn't know about. Confucius Institute, as an example.
Yep, right.
People now are and we have one at a school at South Carolina,
Yep.
where they're taking our brightest, they're taking our intellectual property under the guise of scientific study.
Yep.
And so it's given them awareness, it's given them I guess a wanting to learn more about it. And look at what this pandemic's cost, 4.1 million lives.
Yep.
The economic impact
Yeah.
is what is striking. It came out of nowhere.
Right.
So
Yeah, on that one, you are successful in business. You have linkages. You know everybody. If we do go forward and decouple from China in a serious way and bring back the supply chains quickly, what will be the feel of business? We know the chamber, and we're going to have some pushback from Wall Street crowd. But just across Main Street, USA, there's folks that have businesses. We don't want to be punitive, but we want to, hey, bring it back. How do we adjust for that?
it's interesting. You know, the number one comment I've heard.
So Raheem and I were talking about, what it is that's so inspiring about an event like this with so many high-profile folks who really are laying it out there on the line, and how they understand what you understand, and that is that as America goes, so goes the rest of the world, and that's why it is that we have to be here and we have to lead every single day the way that we do. However, it is that we can get in our own avenue and continue to lead.
I couldn't agree more, and it's so important given how much gravity America has in the world right now. You know, the reason we voted to leave the European Union feels like so many decades ago now, but it was only about 4 years ago, is that there's a moral vacuum in Europe. You know, everybody wants to work in their own favors, and the Germans are taking the Russian gas, and you've got the migrant crisis that's still continuing on, and Brussels didn't want to do anything about the pandemic despite the fact that it claims that it exists for the continent in crisis situations. Meanwhile, we have this friend across the Atlantic who has bailed us out a number of times, both in terms of warfare, economy, and beyond. And we've sort of turned our backs on America. And I've often felt both very badly about that, and often felt like I should do something to change that. And now, of course, America is in the grip of its own crisis, both domestic and foreign. It's foreign in the shape of the Chinese Communist Party, what's going on in Islamist Turkey, what's going on all across the world with this new axis of evil coming together. Not to get too neocon about it all, but I mean, that's clear that that's what's happening between the mullahs in Tehran, Erdogan, Xi Jinping, and also a domestic crisis, right? And a domestic crisis that's really been born out of a philosophy, a failed philosophy that came over from Europe, communism. Communism and Marxism on the streets of the United States is something I never thought I'd really see. Look, we've read all of it, right? Between us, we probably run the gamut of critical theory. Adorno, all of these guys, we've done all of this. And Andrew Breitbart, of course, did this most amazing job of summarizing all of it in his book, Righteous Indignation, which everybody needs to read, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we're living this now. We're living what Andrew Breitbart warned about.
Yeah.
And I think it behooves the Western world to not, I'm not saying America needs saving, but it's to ride to the sound of the guns right now. And everybody in this room and everybody in this building today is riding to the sound of the guns, Gina.
That's a great way to put it, Raheem. I appreciate that. Tomorrow, more to come. It looks amazing. Joe Piscopo, our own Joe Piscopo, is actually going to be here. And then, of course, we're going to have more from War Room. And we're going to tell you more about what we have coming tomorrow after we go back to Falkirk Freedom Summit, because they're continuing just a little bit here, and we'll bring it back to us right after that. Stay tuned.
Think about the military establishment. They actually have a military that's outflanking us everywhere around the world.
Yeah. Right. It was, I said in the earlier part, it's a little ironic that Queen Elizabeth now, the UK is starting to ante up, right? Trump's, America first, but we want friends, right? We want the rest of the world. And so the UK is flying a battleship group into the South China Sea right now. Do you get a sense we're going to get some help from the rest of the world as we go at China?
Well, I would hope that we do. I've been in the region with Dr. Yoho, so it was a very learning, informational aspect.
Right.
But my problem exists, Dave, that there's an aristocracy here in America that has, and Michael Pillsbury talked about it, the Carter Doctrine, where we actually gave our technology to the Chinese thinking they would be like us.
Right.
And it still goes forward even today in the NDAA bill, where we're trying to restrict the EB-5s. Now what we do is we give them a bypass, go collect $200, get a magic ticket through Portugal to get an E1, E2. And so China's feeding on us. And so it's hard to have a cohesive battle plan when part of your backdrop or your leadership is fighting against you.
Right. All right. Thank you, Paul Gosar, for being here. Thank you. Congressman Mike Cloud, representing Texas. I did not get to serve with you, but I've got to meet with you, and I'm impressed with everything you're working on. When you look out at China, they ran a cultural war, and they got rid of, back in the 60s under Mao, the cultural piece was, get rid of all the old Confucian ethic, the old religion, the old sayings, the old proverbs. We got a little of that going on in this country right now, maybe more than a little. And so when you look across the country and you see this unrest coming out, do you see any association between China? You guys all get the China Daily every day, right? Delivered in the major papers that come to your door. China's on an all-out aggressive push, backing a lot of the unrest here. And as a member of Congress, how do you deal with that and deal with it back home in your district?
Yeah, well, what you're saying is so true. It's really hard to look at the landscape and not see China's fingerprints in virtually every facet that we're in life right now. And, we're waking up to the realization that China has not been our friend, that they have turned all our goodwill back to undermine us and continue to do so. And the way they have exerted their influence, we can talk about their economic strength and all those things, but really their greatest strength is how they have infiltrated the very fabric of what it means to be America.
Yeah, very
and so they're
Say more on that.
Well, just how they've worked their way into major positions on institutions, for whether it's universities, whether it's media. We see how Hollywood is now at their beck and call. We have Top Gun coming out. It was a very pro-American movie, right? You would think, except that they've also kowtowed to the communist censorship. And so this has been progressing, sadly to say, for many decades. And when we look at how a country went from being a third world country to the greatest existential threat to freedom, to liberty in the world, we have to recognize that we played a big part and continue to play a big part in allowing that to happen and even funding it in parts.
Right. What are the? It seems like there's almost unanimity across the Freedom Caucus and the American people. Most of the experts. I don't see any books out there that are positive on China. That's one way of putting it, right? The last panel, it was all negative. It's a war. It's a threat. It's a hidden. It's cloaked. Those are the names of the titles. Yeah. So we have unanimity across the board. What are the action items? What do we need to do to get this right? I mean, I've heard in Pompeo and A.G. Barr, and there's been some talk, Bannon this morning, that we say, hey, let us in. We want to know about the virus. We want to know the DNA strand, all the technical stuff.
Right.
And if you don't let us in, we decouple in a strong way. Hong Kong, right across the board, financially, not just tariffs, but financially, which is in the trillion range. But what action steps can people take if we want to save this country? That's
really the great question, because, we have to remember that what defines us as a nation is we the people. It's not we the government.
Yeah, right.
And so certainly there's a role to play from a policy standpoint, and we need to have hardline policies toward China. It's wonderful to have an administration who's taking that role seriously, closing the embassy and such, which served as a spy center right in the middle of our energy sector, our medical sector, and our space and technology sector, right? And so it's so important to do that. We have to do what we can. I know there's bills out there to talk about, banning TikTok, for example.
Right.
Well, if every American understood the threat that China is, they can delete TikTok today. We don't need a government mandate to do that. What we need is an understanding among the American people that China is not playing games with us. What's different between them and the Soviet Union is the Soviet Union was at least honest about their intentions toward the United States. China has been willing to shake our hands and smile while they work in every facet to undermine our very existence.
Yeah, it's very hard to get that across. Very well put. Thank you very much, Congressman Cloud. Ted Yoho, Florida. I think I'm going to follow up on Congressman Cloud, the TikTok thing. Some of the folks out watching may not know, by law in China, every Chinese firm has a back door. All the information has to flow to China. Not might flow, will flow, right? So the TikToks and the others, and then there's the issue of auditing. Folks don't know, every firm that's in an index fund here or on one of our New York Stock Exchange or the S&P or whatever has to be audited by the SEC. The Chinese firms don't have to. And I think Biden was in on some of that and Clinton was in on some of that, right, and special. And so how have we been so flat-footed as a country that we give Chinese firms better deals? And what that means if you're not audited, right? If you own stock in a Chinese company, and the CCP, right, not the Chinese people, but the CCP, they say your balance sheet's zero now. It's zero. You own nothing, and your profit's zero. How do we respond to this? How are we so naive to give them this status? And what are we going to do about it?
We didn't pay attention to what was going on. I mean, this is not something that happened in this administration. This has been 30 to 40 years of ignorance, neglect, or dereliction of duty.
Yep.
China always, and China's very smart and astute about what they do, and they use our laws against us, and they claim national security interests.
Yeah, right.
And when you have an organization or a business, understand if it's in this country, it is sponsored by the Chinese Communist Party. There is no separation. Right. On their board of members, they're Chinese Communist Party members. It's a requirement. If you look at that glass plant in Dayton, Ohio, the managing businesses or managers of that are Chinese Communist Party. President Obama did a great documentary on that called American Factory. I'd invite people to watch it. It shows you exactly what's going on with China. And to be able to deal with China, and as far as policies, I don't want to say we're at a war with them, but I think we need to wake up. When I was in business, I didn't worry about trying to take down my competitor. Mm-hmm. I made my business better.
Right.
And so if we beat them on competition, which we can because we've done that in the past, but if you understand what their end game is, it'll teach you how to respond to that. Right. Michael Pillsbury, who was here, we got to talk to him. His book is a wake-up call. I've been in Congress for 8 years, chaired the Asia Pacific Subcommittee on Foreign Affairs last Congress. And when you understand what they are trying to do, it makes the decisions easier. Their goal is, number one, is to be the world economic superpower and the military superpower and have complete hegemony. The scary thing is they're 75 years almost into that. Mao Zedong in 1949 laid out the 100-year marathon. Deng Xiaoping, I watched a documentary back in the 80s he did this. And he says we can't compete with Japan or the American in IT and manufacturing, but we can corner the market on rare earth metals. As Dr. Gosar brought up, they have done that. Do you realize today they have cornered the market on the agrochemical? They own Syngenta, largest agrochemical company in the world. They control that. That same company controls a third of the seeds our farmers use. They own the largest hog producer in this country. They control the supply chain on the vitamins and minerals that go into our animal feeds. They control the supply chain on the minerals and trace elements that go into our fertilizer. Then you look at APIs. Rosemary Gibson's book, China RX, outlines this very well. You know what the neat thing is? The neat thing is we're seeing in Congress a bipartisan wake-up of doing that. And then go back to, if you go back to the, when President Xi Jinping was here with President Obama in the Rose Garden, and they brought up the the dredged land masses in the South China Sea, I refuse to call them islands because that gives legitimacy.
Right.
He said, we have no intention of militarizing those.
No.
Yet today, they're militarized. You can land fighter jets there, offensive and defensive weapons. And one of the people that we've talked to out of Hong Kong says, and he's a very wealthy person, he says, if the Chinese Communist Party says it, it's a lie. And our fight, our role is not with the Chinese people.
Right.
It's with the Chinese Communist Party, and there's a distinction there. And then if you listen to the 19th Chinese Communist Party Congress in 2017, Xi Jinping was very bold. He said the era of China has arrived.
Wow, yeah.
No longer will we be made to swallow our interests around the world. It's time for China to take the world center stage.
Wow.
They dishonor their contracts around the world. Yep. You look at what they've done in the South China Sea. They were taken to the Permanent Court of Arbitration by the Philippines in 2016. They lost that. They ignored that ruling. They didn't even send anybody there. And so they don't honor contracts. You look at what they're doing to Hong Kong.
Right.
50-year commitment.
Yep.
They have ignored that. Now they're going to focus, and that's done, to Taiwan. So you ask what we can do about that. We have got a policy we've written in our office that we've shared with manufacturers, and we promote manufacturing the ABC method. Manufacture anywhere but China. Because every time we buy a product from China, it empowers that nation.
Right.
We've got the Mongolia Third Neighbor Trade Act, which would create 50,000 jobs in Mongolia by allowing them to bring their cashmere to this country instead of letting it go to China. Mm-hmm. China today is still considered a developing nation in the WTO. We've got legislation that says, no, you're not. If you've got an economy of this size, if you've got a blue water navy, you've got a space program, the second largest economy in the world, guess what? You're not you're not a developing nation. We've got the Taiwan Invasion Prevention Act that we're submitting, I believe it's this week, because there's this political ambiguity over the status of Taiwan.
Yep.
We're making it very clear that all negotiations between Taiwan and China must be peaceful. If they overstep that and use force, which Xi Jinping says we're ready to draw blood on Taiwan,
yep.
If that happens, this bill will authorize automatically an AUMF where we can help Taiwan defend themselves. But it is predicated on what China does. So it's their choice, not ours.
Good.
It's a 5-year period, it sunsets.
Yep.
And those are the things that we can do to send that signal.
Super.
And we can't do this alone.
Super.
There has to be a call to action by these other nations.
Yep.
And the ASEAN bloc of nations is that's a block of 10 nations, 653 million people, $3 trillion in trade.
Yep.
They have to stand up with us. And I've implored this to Prime Minister Lee when he was the chairman of the ASEAN bloc, yep. And the new one from Vietnam. And he told me, he goes, Ted, we have a compact that we don't interfere with the politics of the other nations. I said, sir, I respect that and I honor that. But that was 50 years ago. The world has changed.
That's right. Good.
You need to come together as a bloc. And it won't be just you. It'll be us. It'll be Canada, Germany, France, Japan, South Korea, Australia, India. And do you suppose if the rest of the world said enough's enough?
Right.
They would change their habits.
I think I got a good feeling. You can tell we got the smartest guys in the room in the Freedom Caucus. Ted Yoho, Mike Cloud, Paul Gosar, Ralph Norman. Thank you all very much for being with us. We're going to fix this problem in no matter of time.
Thanks, David.
Thank you. Thank you, man.
Hey, good job.
Thank you, brother. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, man. You're on a roll, man. Good. Oh, yeah? All right. I want to apologize. I thought we had one more session. Louis Gohmert is in the house. He's been awesome on China forever. I think you all know him. And Nan Hayworth, Congresswoman Nan Hayworth, New York, is in the house. But we're going to continue talking together, solving the problems. And we just want to say thank you for a great day one. Tune in tomorrow. Go to the Falkirk Center on Facebook. Support Falkirk Center. Spread the word. Shoot media links to everybody. Any media can stream using our link. We had record numbers today in the media shooting this voice of rationality out to the world. So the Falkirk Center checking out for today. See you tomorrow morning. God bless. Thank you all.
I'm Weather Nation meteorologist Chelsea Ambries, and some of our top weather headlines include the flooding concerns that are going to be along the Gulf Coast. You can see over the last couple of days down towards the Rio Grande Valley into Texas, significant rainfall from what was Hannah, and then along New Orleans and into Mississippi, we've had some significant rainfall. We're still going to be following that chance for some flooding concerns as we do have tropical moisture from the Gulf of Mexico pushing onshore, kind of just taking that energy from what was Hannah and just wringing out all of the moisture that's in the atmosphere. So from Brownsville through Houston, Lake Charles, Hattiesburg, Mobile, all areas that could be dealing with some localized flooding through the day today. So when we are timing things out, we've had some heavy rain out there. We've had some severe storms this morning, even some tornado warnings, and we could still be dealing with that as we go into the afternoon and evening hours. Maybe getting a little bit of a break as we head into the overnight hours just to reignite more of these storms even farther to the east into areas of Alabama and Florida as we go into the day tomorrow. So we're still going to be following the widespread shower chances. Even scattered rain pushes farther inland into the deep south as we go into our Tuesday, and we can't completely rule out that chance for maybe an isolated, strong, potentially severe storm. So on top of what's already fallen, we could still put down another 3 to 5 inches in localized spots. So flooding concerns are going to be the big story down along the Gulf Coast. This is just one of the top weather headlines, Patrick, that we are following.
Yeah, the other headline, Chelsea, thank you so much. We're looking at the severe risk across parts of the upper Midwest and into the Northeast. States like Ohio, Indiana, as well as northern Kentucky could see some damaging winds with those storms firing up along the cold front. We've had lingering showers throughout the morning across the state of Maine. That hasn't been the strong weather. That'll be building back in throughout the day, closer to this frontal boundary as it's diving to the south and southeast. High pressure right to the south of that front will continue to feed in the moisture out of the deep south, out of the Gulf of Mexico, and that will continue to contribute and produce some heavy thunderstorm activity, not just today, but this is into Tuesday as that front starts to hug the Atlantic coastline. We'll see some scattered showers and thunderstorms, maybe even some impacts into the coastal areas out over the open waters of the western Atlantic. We'll see some strong thunderstorms. So there will be severe opportunities from Washington.
The number one existential threat to the United States and people throughout the world, including the people of China, and that is the Chinese Communist Party. My guest is for the opening, and I only came off sea duty to be here at the summit, and because of my dear friend and close
How
colleague.
are you today, Commodore?
Thank you. Good, and I'm glad to be back. Glad to be back ashore. Listen, I want to thank Dave Bratt, Charlie Kirk, Jerry Falwell Jr. for everything they've done in this tremendous effort to stand up the Falkirk Center and to put this summit on under obviously very trying conditions given the CCP virus and what it's done to our country. I want to start off with something today to reinforce the power that the Falkirk Center is having, that this fight for freedom is having, that the guys like Charlie Kirk, Jerry Falwell Jr., Dave Bratt, and of course, obviously the President of the United States, the entire team at the White House are doing throughout the last couple of days, and including live right now, their protests throughout the world by Chinese citizens that have defected, have gone to the West. And we have a whole series I want to open up before I get into the interview with Peter to see if we can roll some footage. I think we have it. I just want to summarize where they're from first. I think South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, Houston, Texas, the United Kingdom, Canada, and France is where these protests are happening live. We're going to try to stream in some people. So we go ahead and start with South Korea, and let's start to roll through it, guys. These are live protests going on by people from associated with the whistleblower movement, people that are associated with the new federal state of China, Chinese citizens, people that are associated with Tiananmen Square. These are free people throughout the world. And what I loved last week, I think this is the one in South Korea. We'll go through the footage. If you saw the other day in Houston, they were heckling. These Chinese Americans and expatriate Chinese were heckling the CCP members at the Houston consulate, which we know is a nest of spies. And so you're seeing this is really the first time there's been mass demonstrations, by people in foreign countries at the consulates. And what they're saying is a couple of things. They've picked up the mantra of my colleague here, Peter Navarro. They're saying the CCP lied and Americans died, or the CCP lied and Frenchmen died. CCP lied and Canadians died. And they're relentless about this. They're also talking about the need for freedom and the need for the Chinese Communist Party take down the CCP. This is the number one focus, I think, of the Chinese people, to end the enslavement of themselves by the Chinese Communist Party. And to that, I want to turn as we watch the B-roll. And guys, give me a heads up when we have somebody. I think we're going to try and actually get some people here to interview during this. But I want to turn to Peter Navarro. Look, first off, how powerful does it feel to have the meme that you started? And I think it was on, I don't know if it was on Maria or if it was on Jake Tapper. It was about a month ago. You said the CCP lied and Americans died. And that tended to, I tell you who it really resonated with initially were people that were expatriates that had left China and had defected to the West because they understand that everything the Chinese Communist Party says is a lie. What did it feel like? How did you come up with it first, and then how do you feel that it's now gone throughout the world?
Steve, first of all, it's great to be here, and I want to say to you that it was the genius of you, Raheem, and Jack to figure out, long before the World Health Organization would admit it, that there was a pandemic coming from the Chinese Communist Party. Your show, War Room Pandemic, it was named that long before this was officially declared.
By the way, we would love to take credit, but that was citizens of China that told us, hey, if they shut down, as you know, because you've traveled, when you shut down Hubei province, the size of France, in Wuhan, it's something big.
But to your question, let me say two things. First of all, when I see people around the world carrying that sign, CCP lied, Americans died, French people died, whatever, it grieves me that I don't see these same signs in Portland and Seattle and Chicago and New Orleans and New York and everywhere, because Americans have died. We're approaching 140,000 now died from the virus. And this is not just a slogan, Steve. Let me walk everybody through the history right now.
But hang on, before the history of it, because I want to talk about the history of you to connect to this. And by the way, guys, we can play the B-roll as we go. I want to make sure people, they're going to get enough of looking at Navarro and myself. You wrote a book, and one of the ways we came to know you in the Trump campaign and really came to know you, you've written a couple books. One is Crouching Tiger, but the one you wrote in 2006, The Coming China Wars. And in this book, you pick up two topics we're going to talk about. You talk about pandemics, right? And you talk, because your experience with SARS, and you talk about flooding. But I want to go to pandemic. I want to go to the point of what you said in 2006, that you understand the seriousness of this. You understand how this stuff can explode. So walk us through that, and then walk us through how you got the idea of calling this the CCP virus.
Page 150 in The Coming China Wars, Steve, it doesn't just talk about this possibility. It says, basically, because of the way the Chinese Communist Party runs that country, there was a high likelihood, this is 2006, there's a high likelihood that China would create a viral pandemic that could possibly kill millions. 2006. And the reason why I made that prediction was because of a close study of how China operates. And back then, the big concern there was the animal husbandry, the way they did their fisheries, it just the filthiness with which they created what I called a viral soup. And this was a couple of years after SARS. I looked at it, it's like, wow, this is coming again. And then, the other thing is this Three Gorges Dam. I don't know if it's going to collapse today or tomorrow or next week, but I do know at some point, and I said it in the book, that Three Gorges Dam is a disaster waiting to happen. The Chinese officials themselves have talked about the corruption in the construction of that dam that made it comprised of what they called tofu rather than concrete. So
I just want to make sure, because I think this is important for the Freedom Summit. I think it's important for the Falkirk Center in Liberty. When this book came out in 2006, if you read it, it's chilling, because Navarro goes through in detail how a viral pandemic can start in China. He also goes through how the Communist Party are weaponizing water coming from the Himalayas throughout all of Asia to have control of Asia. And he talks about the potentials of all these dams breaking. This book was not greeted with 5-star reviews in the New York Times, okay? This is like Rosemary Gibson on her China RX about the supply chains. The Falkirk Center, Jerry Falwell Jr., Dave Bratt, Charlie Kirk, all the people associated, Liberty University, you're going to get the same blowback, right, that President Trump's gotten in the administration. Because this book came out, you were dismissed as a crank, right? As this thing, there's not going to be China wars. We're coming together. China's getting more liberal. The CCP is getting more open. The citizens are benefiting more from this, and all this stuff about the pandemic and the dams. That's all that's all the beginning of these kind of right-wing kooks that are looking for bogeymen all the time.
And don't forget, I was in a university environment out in California at the time where, like many universities, my own was bringing in Chinese Communist Party money hand over fist to support it. So when you do a book like that, Steve, the pioneers are the ones with the arrows in their back. But that book today reads just like a government report. And what we have in front of us is the greatest challenge, the greatest existential challenge of our lifetime. And it's not just the pandemic, it's a lot of other things. But if I may, I'd love to talk through why CCP lied, Americans died, is a sign that should be up in the hands of protesters in Seattle and Portland and elsewhere. So let's, if I may, let me walk you through the timeline as I see it. We had in November the first confirmed cases of the China virus, and the people involved in that were very close proximity to the infamous Wuhan the Wuhan wet market, but also there were 2 biological virology labs there that some have, I think, correctly called P4 labs, perhaps P4 weapons labs. And if you take an Occam's razor approach to figuring out, where did this virus come from, and the simplest explanation is usually the correct one, there's a lot of evidence that points to that virus escaping from one of those 2 labs. But even if that's not true, what transpired after that is a history of shame by the Chinese Communist Party, because in December and January, what the party did was hide the virus from the world. They used the World Health Organization as a shield to disguise human-to-human transmission and the almost certainty of a pandemic. And during that time, they did several things. First, China is usually a net exporter of personal protective equipment, the masks, the gloves, the goggles, all the things that our healthcare workers need at the front lines to fight the virus. What China did during that time was vacuum up all of the PPE all around the world. They effectively hoarded that. So when shortages popped up everywhere from Milan to New York and people got infected or died because of that, that tracks right back to the CCP.
We're going to go to a commercial break in a second. Raheem, just jump in here. But I want to say, how did you find that out? This is the brilliance of what you tracked. There's you actually could go back and watch as they were doing this, because they have to do some reporting, correct?
Actually, those statistics come right from a release by the Chinese Communist Party. The data in China almost always lies, but in this case, they let that one slip out, including the fact fact that it was 2 billion masks. And when we come back from commercial break, I guess, I want to go on and talk about the other thing that happened, which effectively guaranteed that Americans would die because the CCP lied.
One thing right before we go we know that the Taiwan CDC notified WHO on 31st of December of 2019 that there was a SARS-type outbreak in Hubei province in central China that had human transmission and community spread. Human-to-human transmission and community spread. We know for a fact that they had this. Okay, guys, we go to break.
Raheem, the enforcer.
Full of people remarking upon the protesters, remarking on the courage of Dr. Navarro, Stephen K. Bannon, got Jack Maxey by my side here. We want your thoughts at #WarRoomPandemic. We'll be back with more after this short break.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Downtown Washington, D.C., courtesy of the Falkirk Center, the Freedom Summit here. We're going to be bringing you an interview with a gentleman called Tex, who was present at a New Zealand protest yesterday. But we want to hand back over to Stephen K. Bannon and Dr. Peter Navarro, Assistant to the President of the United States. Steve?
Yeah, we think it's very fitting to kick off the Freedom Summit, to kick it off with protests throughout the world against the Chinese Communist Party by the whistleblower movement, by the New Federal State of China. New Federal State of China is a collection of expatriate Chinese that have come together really to say, hey, the argument's always been made on Wall Street that you got to deal with the CCP because if the CCP is not in control, China is just going to devolve into chaos and devolve into anarchy. The New Federal State of China, the whistleblower movement, it's all these Chinese citizens that are now citizens of other countries. Some are expatriates, some are defectors that have said that's not true. You know, the Chinese people throughout the world where they've had rule of law, where they've had democracy, whether it's in Taiwan, in old Hong Kong, in Singapore, the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, have thrived. And so throughout the world today, we're showing some of the footage from South Korea all the way to France and Canada. I think a couple of them we're going to try to pick up live. But I want to go to the protest yesterday and talk to Tex. It's very appropriate, you know, here from the United States having Tex in New Zealand. But Tex, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Hi, Mr. Bannon. Yes, I can. Hi, Mr. Bannon. Yes, I can. Mr. Bannon. Yes, I can.
Hi, Tex. Is that good? Tex, can you tell us why are citizens of New Zealand, we see Australia, South Korea throughout the world, why are you taking to the streets to protest outside these consulates, the CCP consulates? Well, what are you trying to achieve? What are you trying to achieve?
Okay, I think first thing is to raise awareness about this, the truth about this virus to start with. And the other thing is to tell them that, here are a group of Chinese people with new Chinese people that is not imposed by you, that is standing outside of your consulate to tell you that you are a illegal regime. And we are here to celebrate our new identity as the citizen of New Federal State of China, and also to raise awareness to the local community, like who actually made the virus. Because in New Zealand, we are so, our medias are so controlled and so compromised. We don't hear any news at all. So there's no awareness of this virus, about its severity, about its origin. People know nothing about the virus. Yeah, so we are here to raise awareness as well.
Those of you that are expatriates and live in different countries, Dr. Navarro coined that term about a month ago, CCP virus, the CCP lied, Americans died. Is that your belief? You believe you directly, as an expatriate, you directly tie this virus back to the activities of the Chinese Communist Party?
Absolutely. That's 100%. Basically, this is not a natural virus like what Dr. Li Mengyan has disclosed, because with her position, she divulged into a lot of details that we don't know. So we know the origin of this virus, and we know how it affected New Zealanders. Although it didn't cause a huge health issue within New Zealand, but it did cripple the economy. It did kill 12 people and infected thousands. Yeah.
Tex, another question. You say the CCP is an illegitimate regime, that they when they came to power in 1949, they promised democracy, they promised rule of law, they promised land reform, none of which they've ever done. It's interesting, I've had the honor of meeting the whistleblower movement, the New Federal State of China, individuals from all over the world. The question is, but Harvard, one of the Harvard centers is actually funded by part of the CCP, came out with a study the other day saying the highest ratio in history of Chinese people's support for the Chinese Communist Party regime. How would you respond to that as a former citizen of China? How would you respond to the fact that some of the major universities in America are doing research in conjunction with the CCP and coming up with that, 93% of the Chinese people love the Chinese Communist Party?
I think first of all, we got to look at where they took the data. Basically, I know some people, and also in China there's no freedom of speech, and we don't there's no encouragement of freedom of thinking. Some people just cannot critically think. So I don't know where their data sample base are. So obviously that doesn't count, because when people like us being enlightened, like I think we've been going through enlightenment by with the help of whistleblowers movement. So we know a lot of truth about the CCP and the lie they propagate to the world. If they sample us, they will have a very different result. I assure you.
Last question. I see outside these embassies and these consulates throughout the world, where you guys protested out of the Chinese embassy about a month ago here in Washington, D.C. One of the phrases you use is take down the CCP. The question is that actually one of your objectives, to take down the CCP? And what assistance from the free world? This is a freedom summit. We've talked about the Alliance of Liberty, the Alliance of Democracy. Is your objective to take down the Chinese Communist Party? And if so, what assistance do you need from the free world?
I think, first of all, like you said, Mr. Bannon, from that Harvard study, they say 93% of people, like Chinese people, supported the Chinese Communist Party. I think we first need to tear down the lie. We need to tear down the firewall. We need to let the people within China know the truth, because China is in chaos right now. It's in pandemic, it's in economic chaos, and it's in health chaos, and everything is a mess. They need to know. They need to see what's happening in the flood zone, and people are dying every day because of a virus, because of the incompetence of the Chinese Communist Party. So people need to know that, and also I think the free world needs to stand with the new federal state of China to further push against the CCP, to take down the CCP, even like with military actions. That's what we see. We want to see them down, like now.
Very much. I appreciate it. And we thank you for coming in from New Zealand and great work. Yeah. Sure.
About that Harvard study as well. A single footnote in the study says that it was designed by the Harvard Ash Center and implemented by a, quote, reputable domestic Chinese polling firm, but they never actually say who the firm is, and they don't provide the cost tabs for the data.
It's amazing. Thanks, Raheem. And I want to turn to a Harvard PhD in social science. And before I want to get to that point,
can I do the Harvard joke?
Yeah, no. But
let me do the Harvard joke.
Before we talked about what he said.
Let me do the Harvard joke. Okay. You can tell the Harvard man.
Okay. Yep.
You just can't tell him much. Okay, now that's would be the pollster. I mean, let's think about this, right? You got the Great Firewall of China. You got like over 50,000 cyber cops in uniform listening to everything everybody says. So let me see here. I'm sitting at home and some pollster calls me and they say, "Do you love the Chinese Communist Party?" What am I going to say? And as for those 7%, they're in Xinjiang now.
Yeah.
Making Nikes.
They're in some prison somewhere.
Yeah.
Let's. I want to go back to. We only got a couple of minutes to start.
Harvard's education, CCP's re-education.
Well, no. Talk about that.
Come on.
For a second. How is Harvard, the Ash Center? You've seen these major universities. The Ivy League universities they're business partners with the Chinese Communist Party.
Yeah, and a lot of these CCP officials went to Harvard. The Liu He, the head of the Chinese trade delegation that came here on January 15th to sign that trade deal, forgot to tell us there was a virus, went to the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. So I think I think the bigger issue here for me is I was walking you through the timeline. I do want to get this out because it's important. It's that during the critical December, January, February time when China was hiding the virus from the world, Steve, what they did was they shut down their own domestic travel. They wouldn't let people go anywhere. You know why? Because they thought people would get infected and it would spread throughout the country. You know what they also did? They let international flights go around the world with hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Chinese nationals. Now, you know some of them were infected. You know the Chinese Communist Party knew that there was a likelihood that some of them were infected. What was it thinking there when it locked down their own country but sent that virus out around the world? What was it thinking? What was its strategy? Did it have a strategy? All I know now is we've got a pandemic that came from China. CCP lied. Americans are dying.
I want to go back to that. Now it's catching throughout the world. And Raheem, jump in here when you got to take us out. It's catching throughout the world that the CCP lied. Americans died. CCP lied. Canadians died. But I keep saying that even if it's not from a bioweapons plan, even if it's not from the Wuhan lab and it inadvertently escaped on some sort of failed gain of function experiment that they should not have been doing, you go back, the chain of title of their decisions from at least mid-December of 2019 has now been documented. I tell you what, let's take a short commercial break. Dr. Navarro and I will be coming back in just a moment.
We're going to come back with more War Room Pandemic. We've got record-breaking views and likes and shares in the live chat at the moment, so that must be Dr. Navarro. You've got to come on the show more. You're clearly a boon to our audience. We're live here from the Trump International Hotel in Washington, D.C. War Room Pandemic returns. Jack Maxey, Raheem Kassam, Dr. Navarro, Stephen K. Bannon, back in just a second.
Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room. Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Well, in turbulent times, you need every possible advantage. NetSuite by Oracle is a sponsor of War Room Pandemic, the world's #1 cloud business system. Smart companies run on NetSuite because it gives you the visibility and control over your financials, your HR, your inventory, everything all in one place. So whether you're doing $1 million or hundreds of millions in sales, NetSuite lets you manage every penny with precision. You have the agility to compete with anyone, work from anywhere, run your whole company from your phone. So join over 20,000 companies who trust NetSuite to make it happen. They actually surveyed hundreds of business leaders and assembled a playbook of the top strategies they're using as America reopens for business. So get your free guide, 7 actions businesses need to take now, and schedule your free product tour. netsuite.com/Bannon. That's netsuite.com/Bannon. Welcome back to a very special episode of War Room Pandemic, episode 301, broadcasting live from the Trump International Hotel.
Dr. Navarro, you said you're shocked every day when you look at the protesters in Seattle, the protesters in Portland. You never see a sign, CCP lied, American.
Disappointed, not shocked, unfortunately.
Having been
if you get my drift.
I want to go back because I want to talk about the supply chains, medical supply chains. But in the timeline that you lay out, the Chinese came over here and signed a trade deal in mid-January. I think it was the 15th. Brought a whole contingent. What's kind of shocking and looking back over it is they had and we know for a fact they knew at the time they had a massive epidemic, if not pandemic, in central China. It's pretty stunning to people, and the mainstream media never wants to talk about it because they really take kid gloves when it comes to the Chinese Communist Party.
Yeah, several weeks earlier, before that January 15th signing, Xi Jinping actually had a high-level meeting with the Chinese Communist Party officials and basically warned them about the demon virus. So we knew that those top officials knew this. The historical parallel, the historical parallel, Cordell Hull, December 5th. 2 Japanese diplomats come to the State Department and basically talk to Secretary of State Hull, basically ask for some more time so that they can negotiate a peaceful end. And meanwhile, Admiral Yamamoto was putting in place that carrier strike group for that day of infamy. And you tell me, Steve.
No,
what's
so shocking about it is the mainstream media never goes through the timeline and connects the dots.
Worst part, they shook the president's hand.
Shook his hand, knowing
they shook our hands and smiled. They broke bread with us. Would have been nice to tell us that there was a China virus with human-human transmission raging through China.
And what Dr. Navarro is talking about...
Would have loved to know that.
What Dr. Navarro is talking about, his title is actual General Secretary Xi. We don't refer to him as President Xi. He's General Secretary of the Communist Party. Just like Gorbachev was the General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. Xi is the General Secretary of the Communist Party. I'm not so sure he's really the president because I don't believe that that's a legitimate regime. I think it's totally illegitimate. But we know for a fact, because under pressure of how out of control was getting in Wuhan and Hubei, that he had to have this. He had a conversation in the first week of January that talked to senior level cadre that said that we're going to get our hand. We're going to get on top of this.
Let me tell you something else that really should disturb the American people about this. The January 15th Phase 1 deal was about a lot of things, but most of all, what it was about was China promising, as it had back in 2015, to stop stealing America's intellectual property. This is the seed corn of American prosperity. And the Chinese Communist Party steals upwards of $500 billion of wealth from America every single year. They promised again in this deal, but you know what? After they spawned the virus, hid the virus, sent it around the world, what did they try to do next, Steve? Steal the virus. They are actively hacking the computer systems of the people who are trying to develop a vaccine to protect the American people from the CCP virus. You can't make this stuff up.
I mean, one of the reasons in Houston that I think they shut down the consulate is because of the hacking.
This is what bothers me about the protesters in places like Seattle and Portland. This is what bothers me every day about the so-called mainstream media on TV. They refuse to acknowledge these truths we hold to be self-evident, that the CCP has lied throughout this and is directly responsible for what's going on here in America. It's not just that we're approaching 140,000 Americans that have been killed. We put over 40 million people on the unemployment lines because of the CCP virus, and we've spent literally trillions of dollars. We're doing a stress test in real time of our financial markets and our monetary system, and this will not end well unless we have people who are competent to handle this in this country. And politically, it scares the hell out of me to think that this country could be turned over to Biden and company.
And look, I think it's undisputed that no administration has ever stood up to the Chinese Communist Party like the Trump administration. You see through a whole host of activity. And President Trump, I've said from the beginning, has been very statesmanlike in this, because he's definitely got advisors, and he has people on the outside that are, I'm proud to say, hawks, super hawks or ultra hawks, and he's been tough. Oh, very tough.
But he's also bent over backward to give the Chinese Communist Party the chance to do the right thing, and they've exposed themselves now as not wanting to do that. I mean, for me, the fact that they would try to steal the intellectual property behind the vaccine after they signed a deal in January not to stop stealing our intellectual property, for me, that's full circle.
Well, it doesn't surprise me, because I think what they want to do is they want to come up either therapeutically or with a vaccine and have the West, force the West to kowtow. This is all about kowtowing. That's all they understand. They don't understand win-win. It's always they win. Remember, the only reason they exist is because of Western technology that they've either stolen, forced technology transfers, or in some cases, we've actually sold it to them and given it to them, and American capital, right? And access to the American market.
You're the political guru, the strategist. Why haven't the American voters, the American public, been able to draw a straight line from all of the chaos and problems we are experiencing now straight to the CCP?
Well, because I think now, and that's one of the reasons I think the Falkirk Center and others are in an education process. I don't even think this is about politics, because if you look at the Pew Center study, the American people understand that the rise of the CCP is not in the benefit of the world. It's not in the benefit of the Chinese people. That's why I think it's so powerful. We've actually been able to understand and kind of target what the problem is. The problem's not China. The problem is not the country of China. The problem is not the Chinese people. You look throughout the world where the Chinese people have rule of law, they have democracy, they have freedom of religion and freedom of speech and freedom of assembly. Well, they have these, whether it's in Taiwan, in Hong Kong like it used to be, Singapore, the United States, throughout the world. They are thriving, active, great members of society in the countries. So we know that their lies about, if the CCP didn't keep a firm hand on China, it would devolve into warlordism and chaos and anarchy, is a bold-faced lie. And the reason that the media doesn't do it, they're in business with them. Hollywood's in business with them. The major media companies are in business with them. You know, the other day they had an editorial in the Washington Post, the Jeff Bezos Amazon Washington Post. Not an op-ed, the editorial page. And what they said after Pompeo's speech is that the Trump administration is taking us on a dangerous path. If you see what O'Brien said and FBI Director Wray, Bill Barr's magnificent speech in Michigan, and then capped by Pompeo's at the Nixon Library, this is a dangerous path of confrontation, right? What the business community wants, what the capital markets want, they've always wanted to kowtow to China. And here's the reason. The party at Davos's business model is predicated upon slave labor in China and serfs and workers throughout the rest of the world, nothing more than Russian serfs. That's the business model. They're relentless. This administration is the first to stand up and say, hey, look, we can't do this. We've got to have an organized approach to integrate you into the world's economy. That is why the Lighthizer-Navarro-Trump deal that they walked away from, the Chinese walked away from after 18 months of negotiation, was the deal that would have integrated them into the world's economy with fairness, equality, and allowed the Chinese people to have environmental protection and labor protections, and they walked away from it. Do we have to break? How long we got?
You got 3 minutes.
Let me say briefly some of the experiences I've had why I think ultimately we're going to win economically. I mean, today, for example, I'm heading down with the president to North Carolina. What we're going to do is visit a company called Fujifilm Diosynth. It's a subcontractor to Novavax. Now, Novavax is one of 5 companies that's developing a vaccine in half or a third of the time that normally gets to take. But what Fuji is going to be able to do is actually produce that vaccine to help us produce it in the hundreds of millions of doses by January 2021, if it works. Now, here's the difference. In the past, when you do vaccines, you do them in stages, right? You try to find out what works, and then the next stage is the phase 1, 2, 3 trials to do safety and efficacy, and then at the end of that, only if you got something, then you can get the investment to make it happen to manufacture at scale. President Trump, the genius of President Trump, he said, no, we got to be ready. So instead of having this sequential process, we're going to do it simultaneously.
Concurrently.
So Fuji, as we speak, is getting ready to mass up the manufacturing along with a lot of other companies around the world. I'm seeing that. And, I'm working with the president, we stood up a ventilator factory, Steve, in 17 days using the Defense Production Act. 17 days, and within 3 more days, we had ventilators going to Gary, Indiana, and Chicago, Illinois. We're repurposing our factories. We're learning to do this.
We're a net exporter of ventilators
right now. We are the export key, and the CCP is teaching us under duress how beautiful the American manufacturing machine can be. And tomorrow we're going to be making another major announcement about bringing some of our pharmaceuticals back on shore. We were able to stand up N95 respirators in Arizona and Rhode Island in 5 weeks. Usually takes at least 9 months to build those kind of factories. My point here, Steve, is that we are at war. This is a wartime president. We are engaged in the most rapid industrial mobilization of our time. And the president is using the Defense Production Act to do miraculous things on therapeutics, vaccines, PPE, as the China virus attacks us.
Let's come back. I tell you, we're going to take a commercial break. We'll be right back. Dr. Peter Navarro.
Yeah, I want to remind the audience listening at home and watching this that to listen to the second hour, make sure you're subscribed to the Citizens of the American Republic pages on YouTube. # War and Pandemic to have your say. A big shout out to the socially distanced audience here. We're live downtown at the Trump International Hotel. Dr. Peter Navarro, Stephen K. Bannon, Jack Maxey, Raheem Kassam. I want to shout out America's Voice, the John Fredericks Radio Network, Newsmax, G News, and GTV. This is blown through the CCP's firewall, so the Lao Beijing, the ordinary people of China, can hear about what the CCP is really up to all around the world. Also, we'll be right back after this short break.
host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Well, welcome back to a very special episode of War Room Pandemic, episode 301, broadcasting live from the Trump International Hotel in downtown Washington, D.C. The Falkirk Freedom Summit here featuring Dr. Peter Navarro and Stephen K. Bannon. I also want to make sure that you guys know that there's a whole days of programming on America's Voice today, so make sure you're tuned in to America's Voice. There's an app. You can get it on Pluto, wherever you get your online streaming. America's Voice will have the whole program of events today. Congressmen of the United States, senators of the United States, General Spalding, and great dignitaries talking about the CCP and talking about protecting the Republic from all enemies, foreign and domestic. On that note, I want to hand back over to Stephen K. Bannon and Dr. Peter Navarro.
Look, it took the Falkirk Center Freedom Summit and Dr. Navarro landing him as a guest to get me off the vessel and back here on dry land. But I want to thank Jerry Falwell, Dave Bratt, Charlie Kirk, the entire team associated with the Falkirk Center and what their drive is about all enemies, foreign and domestic. And we know the Chinese Communist Party. We've got a real enemy. I also want to thank GTV and G Media for blowing through the firewall and putting this in Mandarin, both subtitle and also now they've got it in audio version. I know the audience over there is huge. Every day we fight to help the whistleblowers, the new federal state of China, and all the freedom groups associated with China. You've got friends here in the United States, the Alliance of Liberty that's coming together with India, Australia, Japan, the United Kingdom, Canada. It's a great time to challenge the Chinese Communist Party. Your entire time you came on the campaign, the entire reason that you kind of rose to prominence was your focus on this thing called supply chains, that the manufacturing, you used to have the statistics, 70,000 factories are left. It really shocked people because you're the first guy to really go relentlessly day after day after day. The Chinese Communist Party with Wall Street and corporate America has taken the manufacturing base of the country over to China with the slave labor there. You've also argued that, hey, a fourth industrial revolution is coming, right? We got to be at the vanguard of that. We pay for the research. We have the high-tech companies. Walk us through, where do you think we stand today? I know you're leaving here in a few minutes to go with the president down to North Carolina. Where do we stand today as being at the tip of the spear of the fourth industrial revolution, and not just as the research center, but bringing back those high-value-added manufacturing jobs?
Sure. Steve, let me talk to you about why we lost our pharmaceutical supply chain. We're dangerously dependent on the rest of the world for our essential medicines. And guess what? Over 75 countries around the world during this pandemic have issued restrictions on what they export to us in order to help Americans deal with this deadly CCP virus. But what's really going on here is the standard reason, Steve, why we lost our manufacturing to begin with to China on all our factories. So you have three different stages of pharmaceutical production. You have what's called the key starter materials, the advanced pharmaceutical ingredients, and then from those you make what's called the finished dosage form tablets, pills, and injectables. And the problem we have with the key starter materials is it's environmentally intensive, heavy chemical kind of thing. So what we've done is we've offshored those materials to places like China and India, where they have lax environmental regulations, and they basically throw everything into their rivers and streams rather than treat it. So we lost that. And then API, the advanced pharmaceutical ingredients, active pharmaceutical ingredients. The problem there is it's very labor intensive to make, so you got the sweatshops of Asia take those over. And then the finished dosage form, interestingly enough, is partly a tax haven problem. Places like Ireland, which is about the size of Rhode Island or Delaware, very, very small place, and because of the tax system there, we buy a tremendous amount of finished dosage form pharmaceuticals. What we've learned from this crisis is we have to bring those pharmaceuticals back. We have to bring our medical equipment back, like ventilators, which we've done. And we got to bring our medical supplies like
face masks, goggles, and the like. And so in the Trump administration, there's a full-scale effort, whole of government effort to do that. Every day we're issuing new contracts. We've revived the textile industry in this country to make some of our masks and gowns and things like that. And Steve, this is the focus that we have to have if we're going to succeed in fighting this deadly virus, as well as creating the kind of good manufacturing jobs we're going to need in a post-pandemic world, because this China virus, this CCP virus, is just it's a direct attack on some of the key sectors of our economy: the airlines, hospitality, leisure, sports. There's going to be fundamental structural changes that we're going to have to deal with. We're going to have service sector refugees from our major metropolitan areas, and the only way we're going to succeed as an economy, and President Trump is leading the way on this, is to create more and more and more manufacturing jobs, and that requires onshoring our supply chains.
You know, one thing that we got to have the administration do, you have to be on more shows where you have the time, not just these quick hits, but you have the time to actually walk through the logic that's very powerful. Tell us that we got a couple of minutes. What you're going with the president today, walk us back through that. What is this visit today, and why is this important?
The end goal, Steve, is to have a vaccine in a third to half the time normally done. We're hoping by January 2021 that we'll have at least 300 million doses vaccine.
Because I understand now, phase 3 is now starting. They're looking for volunteers. So this is the project. It's the Manhattan Project.
It's called Operation Warp Speed. But remember, the genius of Donald Trump as a businessman, the greatest jobs president in history, is he turned the whole NIH, CDC, HHS paradigm on its head. In the old days, it was stages, sequence, discovery, clinical trials, manufacture, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. What the president has directed be done is we do this simultaneously. While we're developing our vaccines, we're also going to develop the manufacturing capability, not just for the vaccines, but for the pipettes and the needles and everything we need. And Raheem, let me toss to Raheem. Raheem, you're the man, you and Jack.
Thank you so much, Dr. Navarro, and thank you so much for joining us here this morning for a very special first hour of War Room Pandemic. We return for the second hour. I want to make sure we bring in Jack Maxey and hear about what's going on with the flooding that's going on in China right now. We're also going to talk about the new tech news. India has banned a further 47 Chinese apps, so we'll get into that in the next hour as well. And Miles Grove joins us, very special guest Stephen K. Bannon, hosting here live from the Falkirk Center's event at the Trump International Hotel downtown in Washington, D.C. Make sure you hop over to the next live stream. We'll be back in just a second.
and the worst happens.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Well, a very good morning to you. If you're watching live, this is a special episode of War Room Pandemic, Hour 2, broadcasting live from the Trump International Hotel in downtown Washington, D.C., brought to you courtesy of the Falkirk Center's Freedom Summit, protecting the Republic from all enemies, foreign and domestic. They have a great day's program lined up for you, so make sure you're watching. And we want to thank our production partners at America's Voice, at the John Fredericks Radio Network, G News and GTV, blowing through the CCP's firewall to make sure that War Room Pandemic is available in mainland China, and also later on in the day on Newsmax. It's Monday, July the 27th, the year of our Lord 2020, episode 302. Jack Maxey, Stephen K. Bannon, and Raheem Kassam. Steve, why don't you kick us off here?
Well, I got to tell you, I want to thank Raheem for doing such a great job. Just because I came back for a couple of days doesn't mean I'm going to start taking over the hard duty of hosting this show. That's going to be yours. I want to thank really the Trump International Hotel, the Falkirk Center, Liberty University, everybody. This is a very special occasion. You know, Peter Navarro was saying, earlier that he's stunned when he sits there and sees these no signs in Portland, no signs in Seattle that talk about, CCP lied, Americans died, to talk about the Chinese Communist Party virus. Here, there's a real center with Charlie Kirk, Jerry Falwell, Dave Brett that's coming together to educate the American people, on this existential threat of our time, which is the Chinese Communist Party. Our radio audience on the John Fredericks Radio Network can't see it. The AVN, our folks on Dish Channel and Newsmax TV and all of our streaming services can see that we're here at the Trump International in the major ballroom. It's a magnificent setup. In back of us is the world's media. We've got a lot of Chinese media here, and the reason is they thirst for the truth. It's going to be an incredible couple of days. I mean, we have some of the best voices and the most knowledgeable people. We wanted to start off and do something special with Peter Navarro. As everybody knows, Peter's been the real hawk on the economy. But later in the day, you're going to have a panel. You got Michael Pillsbury, who wrote the 100-Year Marathon, which is still the definitive book. That the 100-Year Marathon is really the definitive book that I think explains the Chinese war manual, which is unrestricted warfare. So you got Dr. Michael Pillsbury. You also have a close colleague, a dear friend, someone's on the show all the time. You're going to have General Robert Spalding, Stealth Wars. He's going to be on the panel also. And then on the same panel, you're going to have, I think, one of the unsung heroes of this entire effort, Bill Gertz, the author of, he's a Washington Times columnist and an investigative reporter. He's been doing this for 30 years. I believe he was the only journalist that went out with Mike Pompeo to the Nixon Library, that historic event out there, that speech, really on the 50th anniversary of Kissinger's secret journey to a trip to China to set up the Nixon meeting. But Deceiving the Sky is his book. So later this afternoon, you're going to have some of the top political voices in Washington, D.C. You're certainly going to have some of the top people that are really have been on this for a while. I'd like to call this, and I think the guys at the Falkirk Center, this is a gathering of the hawks. I mean, this is they're probably the most, I think, realistic, hardcore hawks, ultra hawks, super hawks, the people that, and to a person, what I find, and I'm so glad to be involved in this effort, in this movement, is their number one focus, guys, is the freedom of the Chinese people. That what we've allowed to happen, we've allowed the elites in this country to partner with this totalitarian dictatorship that has suppressed the Chinese people. And they've used it as an excuse, and you've seen this now in the kind of, if you look at, Richard Haas was on this morning on Morning Joe. I think John Hollman did a good rebuttal of him, talking about where really the Trump administration is and what the focus is. But the excuse for years and years and years, really decades, has been from the elites that, if the Chinese Communist Party wasn't there, that China would devolve into warlordism, it would devolve into chaos, it would devolve into anarchy, because the Chinese people are not ready for freedom. The Chinese people are not ready to govern themselves, right? And I think the most powerful thing that was said last week of Mike Pompeo was talking about unalienable rights, that the Chinese people's rights come from God. They don't come from the Chinese Communist Party. And you can see throughout the world, and I say, look, just the fact, and someone has been in and around China since the mid-1970s as a young naval officer on a destroyer in the South China Sea. But the key is that the Chinese people, when given rule of law, when given democracy, when given freedom, thrive, and we've seen that from Taiwan, we've seen it from Hong Kong and Singapore to the United States. They're some of the finest citizens you can have. And guys, I was on the boat when the first protests happened of the new federal state and the whistleblower movement at the embassy here in China, in Washington D.C., the Chinese embassy, and then at the White House. And now we're having footage up there, I think, throughout the program of these protests. Some of them live right now in France, in the United Kingdom, in Canada, as this protest goes on now for its 4th or 5th day of Chinese citizens standing up. Jack, I remember watching your interviews and watching your stream and hearing Jack Maxey say, here we'd had these protests in Washington, D.C., and understanding we have problems, have issues, you have to get to the bottom of it. But about peaceful protests, people spitting on police officers, throwing objects against police officers, and here you had Chinese expatriates and some Chinese American citizens, but they were giving water to the police. They were polite, and I checked throughout the world, whether it's Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, the politeness, the order, the dignity that they hold themselves and comport themselves, I think is for all of us. And that's why I'm so happy that we're here today to kick off a Freedom Summit, because at the end of the day, this is what it's about. It's about liberty. It's about freedom. It's about the rule of law. Guys, jump in.
Well, Steve, I just want to point something out. We did a special maybe a month or so ago now, and I talked about the moral imperative and the strategic imperative, and you turned to me and you said, wow, you sound a bit neo-con there. Now, in this intro, this hour, you have used the word superhawk, and you've used the very similar phrasing, that we used to be said about the Middle East. They can't govern themselves, and therefore, tell us just how is this different? What are we? Because a lot of people will hear that kind of rhetoric and think, oh no, these guys are saber rattling. They want a kinetic war with the Chinese Communist Party. I just want to clarify
look,
those
I
points.
think we have to come to the realization, and the mainstream media just hides this. As outlined in Unrestricted Warfare, which is a classic, and it's a little dense, but I've always recommended, if you don't read this, get 100-Year Marathon or Bill Gertz's book or Spalding's book to analyze it. There's 3 types of warfare. There's information/technology war, there's economic war, and there's kinetic war. The Chinese have been not in a Cold War. The Chinese Communist Party has been in an economic hot war with us for a couple of decades, in an economic or a technology and information propaganda war, a hot war. They're on the offense. And so we didn't ask for this war. In fact, we were the ones that actually, through, I think, our own foolishness and naivete, partnered with the Chinese Communist Party really in the late 90s and helped to build this, as Richard Nixon said, potentially a Frankenstein monster with our capital and our technology. So different than the kind of neocons that were going around the world looking for problems. This problem, and this is what Pompeo said, this is not like the Soviet Union, which was about the size of New York State and had an economy that was failing, right? Or that its economy was the size of New York State, an economy that was failing. This is already inside the wire. Right? This is inextricably linked with the party at Davos. This is about managed decline. It's the reason Donald Trump's president, right? The managed decline of the United States, working class people and middle class people rejected that in 2016. It's the reason Joe Biden runs around now trying to go to Scranton, Pennsylvania, and being a populist, being an economic nationalist. People understand you can't be a globalist in America and win here. I think this is fundamentally different than the neocons in the fact that we're not going around the world looking for monsters to destroy. This is a monster that's here. It's the reason your jobs are gone, and this is so important about this virus. And it's one of the touchstones of this entire summit. It's the reason that Dave Brat and Jerry Falwell and Charlie Kirk, we decided to have it in the summer with the heroic efforts of the Trump International Hotel and the people here, all the media people, the other people here at the center, to try to put it on in the middle of a pandemic. It's the reason we call this a pandemic. This is the Chinese Communist Party's virus. Okay, you're going to hear some voices. We have Dr. Yan and some other people are saying, hey, this is actually from a biological weapons program, a gain of function experiment that somehow got out of the Wuhan lab. right? But even if that, what Peter Navarro walked you through was their chain of custody of the decisions they made, the decision they made that exacerbated this virus throughout the entire world. And now we're sitting with, as Southampton University told us, 95% of the deaths, 95% of the economic carnage could have all been avoided. This is going to have an impact on not just American life, but global civilization for decades to come. And it's now time we understand what the problem is. And that problem has to be eradicated. We can't do it. The Chinese people are going to do it. It's the Chinese people's, their struggle for freedom will be the defining event of the first half of the 21st century. And those who assist them in their freedom are going to be remembered in history as on the right side of history. And this is why all the guys on Wall Street, all the guys in corporate America, when Bill Barr is sitting there saying you're collaborators and calling you out by name, when Bill Barr is saying you're guilty of appeasement, and when Bill Barr is then sitting there saying, hey, you better have your lawyer check the FAR requirements because I'm coming after you, every hedge fund, private equity firm, venture capital firm, all of Wall Street, the banks, the corporations, understand. If you've seen reconciliation projects in Africa and other areas of the world, there's going to be a reconciliation project here. Every penny you stole from the Chinese people, every penny that you partnered with the CCP, every penny you took out of China, it's all going to go back. Okay, that is the wealth of the Chinese people. Lao Baijing, old 100 names, that live in virtually abject poverty today, or some de minimis type of working poverty as slave labor to this party of Davos business model. All of that's coming back. So I think it's different than neocons in the fact that it is inextricably in our lives here today and will destroy our freedoms. It's already destroyed our freedoms, destroyed our freedom. Look at this CCP virus. As Peter Navarro says, the Chinese Communist Party lied and Americans died.
Steve, we have about 2 minutes to the first break here. I just want to ask you then, both of you, Jack Maxey, jump in here as well. This paragraph jumped out at me from the Financial Times this week, and I want to get your feedback on it. Quote, although it was Russia that issued the most direct challenge to the Western-dominated international order with its 2014 annexation of Crimea, the Trump administration has since focused on China as its biggest threat, from trade to technology to military affairs. Now, I'm a fan of the Financial Times, and I know you are as well, and that's why that jumped out at me as particularly ludicrous and heinous. When you talk, Steve, about the people who are fighting back versus the collaborators, that is straight up collaborator propaganda.
I want to go back to you because this is the whole thing about the Ukraine. What we have said on the show when it started as War Room impeachment, the Ukraine and Russia, Ukraine's a sideshow to a sideshow. Russia's a sideshow. What you're seeing now, and this is what's so important, and this is why I'm so proud to be part of this Falkirk Center Freedom Summit. This is the Alliance of Liberty. If you see what's happening, it's on the Eurasian landmass. The CCP is the driver, but they have their partners in North Korea, Pakistan, Iran, Turkey, and Russia. But Russia's just a junior partner. And to make it like, and right there, that statement is absurd. That the Crimea is a central thing of the challenge to the West. I mean, Raheem, you reported on this years ago during the revolution in Ukraine about the EU trying to essentially get into the sphere of influence of Russia. This is what triggered all these problems, right? And I'm not defending Russia. Russia is now in the enemy camp. There's no doubt about it. And this is going to be the great struggle of the first half of the 21st century. And thank God you have people like this center and others that are waking up. What this is an education, I think C3, C4. They're here to awaken the American people. Corporations right now are woke on the Black Lives Matter issues. It's time you got woke on the slave labor and what you're doing to the people of China.
And we'll return with more War Room Pandemic. Got to get Jack Maxey in on this conversation in the next segment as well. Otherwise, the audience is going to be on full-on rebellion. Hashtag War Room Pandemic to have your say live in the live chat, on Parler, on Twitter. We monitor all of it. We'll be back. More Stephen K. Bannon, Jack Maxey, Raheem Kassam, War Room Pandemic in a second.
You bring it back, Toss. I'm gonna give a cutting comment to steal your girlfriend Max, and then you take it.
All right. We got some breaking news too. Panorama's doing an interview of a Chinese virologist who said he told Beijing that he found a family that was infected in Shenzhen province on the.
Hey, Miles, can you hear us?
And he said, "I was human to human."
Wow.
Miles, can you hear us?
2 hours.
Panorama's
Nothing.
BBC, isn't it? Oh my gosh.
It does depend on who the interview is going to be.
It sounds like
We're glad to see you. You're on this afternoon, right? Noon. Oh, you're following us right now. You're doing Economic War Room next? Oh, dude, I'm going to give you a shout out when we get back. That's hardcore. God, you're going from we're going from we're like going harder as the day goes on. Starts at Fredericks, goes to War and Pandemic, and then gets to Freeman.
How's the mic? Can you hear
That's
us
great.
okay?
No, it's great to see you. You going to be around for a couple of days? I want to introduce you to Dr. Yan, the virologist that came out of Hong Kong.
Yeah,
Hey,
sure.
Miles, can you hear us? Miles?
Quick mic.
Nope.
Yes,
Stand
I
by
agree.
one second. Okay. Can you hear me?
I got my IFP.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Well, welcome back to the War Room, or the War Ballroom here at the Trump International Hotel in downtown Washington, D.C. We're kicking off the day, the first of a two-day summit here for the Falkirk Center. I just want to remind you about one of the sponsors of this show, NetSuite by Oracle. If you're going to succeed on the back of this pandemic, you need every possible advantage, and NetSuite by Oracle is one of those advantages. Smart companies run on NetSuite by Oracle, the world's #1 cloud business system. So get your free guide right now at netsuite.com/Bannon. You're back in the War Ballroom, as I say, for the first of a two-day summit, protecting the Republic from all enemies, foreign and domestic. And we have some phenomenal people over the course of the day. You can watch it all on americasvoice.news. I will be co-hosting the entire day's programming with Dr. Gina Loudon on America's Voice as well. I want to throw it now over to Stephen K. Bannon and Jack Maxey here.
Yeah, extraordinary day here at in Washington, D.C., Trump International Hotel, Falkirk Center. It's about liberty. It's about freedom. It's about the great existential threat of our time, the Chinese Communist Party. If I knew, by the way, guys, that I had to come off sea duty to come back here to actually take the mic away from Jack Maxey, I would have come back sooner. Just kidding, Jack. Jack, you've got some breaking news, and then I want to talk about, after the pandemic, I want to talk about the floods. What's the breaking news?
Well, you know, we've talked about how China has been covering this up, and we also talked about how the Chinese people are not responsible. But let's remember, the only way we learned about this was because of individual Chinese citizens who were responsible, not the government.
Panorama News in England is going to be breaking a story with an interview this evening of a doctor, Professor Kwok Yung Yang, who's from Shenzhen province. And on January 12th, he diagnosed an entire family 700 kilometers away from Wuhan with the coronavirus. He informed Beijing immediately, and they did not tell the world that it was communicable for another 10 days. Now, he has joined the whistleblower movement. He is, like many Chinese individuals, he is coming forward. One thing that's very important that we remember Pompeo said the other day, the Chinese Communist Party fears their own people. Do you know why? Because they're starting to become informed. They're starting to understand this regime that lives over top of them like a shadow, watching their every movement. And now we're watching what's happening in China right now with the flood particularly, which we're going to get into shortly. But they are literally sacrificing the rural people of China by creating these giant floodplains so as to save the city of Wuhan. And it's a catch-22, but the Chinese people are really the victims here all the way around.
Steve, I got to tell you, Panorama is no joke, by the way. If you get Panorama investigation into you, you better hold on to your seat.
But this is what I want to ask. This is breaking news on twofold. Number one, we have Dr. Yan is here in the audience, and tomorrow we're going to try to get her on the show. She's one of the first defectors away from Hong Kong in this case that has been calling this out in interviews with Fox News and other people. We have another defector now, it looks like, for the whistleblower movement. But the other buried lead is Panorama. I mean, Panorama, correct me if I'm wrong, is that not the most elite of the BBC shows?
That is their flagship investigation show, the top one in the country.
This is the equivalent of 60 Minutes doing it, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
So the BBC, which has not exactly been, I don't think, on the case of the Chinese Communist Party, and particularly the BBC's coverage in Hong Kong, I thought never really got to the heart of it. It's pretty big news to know that their investigative unit has now actually gotten part of the whistleblower movement and saying this. The other thing, guys, you remember, and what Dr. Navarro was saying, the time they're talking about that is at the same time with the Chinese Communist Party, knowing that the Taiwan CDC told them told WHO and also informed others in Hong Kong and other places that there was human-to-human transmission in late December. This time, and I guess it's in mid-January, Jack, is around the time that the delegation was here signing the trade deal. And Peter Navarro brought it up. He said, hey, he shook the president's hand. Right? We had dinners together. We hung out. We basically were cheek by jowl for 3 days. Never mentioned one word about what they knew. And we know that General Secretary Xi knew about this because he was coming under pressure. As you remember, Jack and Raheem, he was coming under pressure for Hubei and Wuhan getting out of control. He copped to the thing that he had a senior cadre level meeting in the first week of January to tell them it's human-to-human transmission, it's community spread. We have a problem in Wuhan. We have a problem in Hubei. This doctor today is going to be, I think, a major, write it down, this is going to be a major, I think now the media is going to be forced to, once BBC does it, CNN, PBS, the New York Times, all of that will start to, now they'll start to fall in line and be able and be forced to take this seriously.
He's also accusing them of a cover-up where the Wuhan wet market is concerned. He claims that by the time they got there to investigate it, that the entire thing had been thoroughly scrubbed. There was nothing to investigate, that the local authorities had bleached the entire thing down. So any discovery from the Wuhan market has to be taken as very suspect after that date.
Well, this goes back to what Miles Gore said about the 5 kills, the 5 strategies to keep the Chinese people down. The people at G News, GTV, and the whistleblower movement said immediately when the videos came up of the Chinese eating bat heads, right? That came up instantaneously. They said that's what the CCP does to take take the spotlight off them and also show the Chinese people, look, the rest of the world thinks you're uncivilized, right? We're here to protect you. They think you guys are barbarians. We're here to protect you. Now you're seeing, right, that he's coming out and saying there was a cover-up. And the cover-up is they wanted to get everything out of that Wuhan market so people couldn't go back there and say, well, hey, I don't think it originated from here, right? That's why they had to do it. Raheem.
Well, so this afternoon in Eastern Coast time, which will be when Panorama airs tonight, I mean, this will be a real sea change moment if the BBC plays it down the line. We may end up with a situation where the BBC decides its editorial position is, as it has been for the past couple of years, more towards the Chinese Communist Party propaganda line. But I have to say, you have seen a shift in tone. The British ambassador from China to the Court of St. James was on the BBC recently. That's where the Harvard study was cited, and that's how we got into the detail on the Harvard study. So they are, the CCP ambassadors are getting chopped up by the BBC at the moment. We'll be paying very close attention tonight to what the questions are from the BBC and how they actually portray this interview.
I want to turn to Jack. We couldn't get a chance with Peter Navarro, but in his book, The Coming China Wars, he goes through the disaster the building of these dams has been. Remember, the Chinese Communist Party is trying to weaponize water. What they're doing is that's why they built these dams, the Mekong River, these other great rivers of Asia. All headwaters are all in the Himalayas, all in Tibet. This is why they're occupying Tibet, is because they want to keep control of those waters, and they've weaponized it. The mistakes they've made in the Yangtze, right, with these dams is chilling. The footage, I don't know if we've got some of the footage up there, but the footage has just been unbelievable that we've shown over the weekend and shown on the Saturday show. But I got to tell you, every day this gets worse, and now they're really, Jack, getting into the rainy season.
They are. In fact, over the next day or so, they're going to see as many as 10 to 15 inches of rain below the Three Gorges Dam. So when you look at the lower Yangtze, we talk about the lower and the upper Yangtze, really we're talking about below Three Gorges Dam and above Three Gorges Dam. Both areas are in an absolute flood stage. They say Chinese media this morning is reporting that 61 million cubic meters per second are flowing in behind the dam. Now,
Hold it. Give us that number again.
61 million cubic meters per second. Now, if the dam were to open up every single one of its gates, the dam can release 110,000 cubic meters per second. That would mean the immediate end of Wuhan. Currently, right now, they are doing a balancing act where they are trying to release just enough to keep the water from overflowing the banks in Wuhan City. Currently, the river is about 25 feet above the street level of Wuhan, and it's about 2 feet below the wall itself. We are looking at a potential absolute disaster. And one of the things that people have to understand, when you take a modern megacity and you put it under 27, 30 feet of water, that means that every single underground pipe, communication system, your sewerage, your fresh water, your subways are all completely filled with
Peter
debris.
Navarro, the reason this is important for you at home and the AVN system and Newsmax is that when that wall of water goes down the Yangtze River Valley, it's going to wipe out, I think, 60 or 7% of API, of the active pharmaceutical ingredients manufacturing, generic drug manufacturing. We are going to now pay for what people have been warning about, Peter Navarro, since 2006, shipping the medical supply chains to China under the control of the Chinese Communist Party, their irresponsibility. This historic biblical flood is going to have an accounting at the end of the day. And the Chinese people, what's heart-rendering is just the lack of support they're getting from the Chinese Communist Party. They're really on their own. And some of this footage has been unbelievable of these barges of people trying to escape and just seeing the complete catastrophe. So if you want to see the true face of the Chinese Communist Party, between the pandemic, their insensitivity to the world of the pandemic, and now what's happening in this flood is incredible. And hey, this flood, I believe this flood can have as big an impact on American life here in the United States as the pandemic did.
Well, and they're also saying now that 48 million people have been displaced so far because of the flood. Nomura Securities this morning announced that they said the third quarter for China is also going to be negative. So, and it's because of just the displacement of these 48 million people. Remember, a week ago, they were saying that only 4 or 5 million people have been displaced. Yeah. Interestingly, still only 150 dead and missing.
Raheem, take us out.
Well, in the next couple of segments, we'll be joined by Miles Guo, one of the key victims of the Wu Mao army and the sock puppets. This is the Stanford Internet Observatory report that I'm holding up right now, showing how much tech activity propaganda surrounds misinformation coming out of the Chinese Communist Party. India this morning as well, banning a further 47 Chinese Communist Party linked apps, including a TikTok clone. They banned 59 Chinese apps previously. We'll talk about all of that and more when we return with more #WarRoomPandemic.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Well, 2020 has been a gut punch to American business, and if you're going to succeed, you need every possible advantage. NetSuite by Oracle is the world's #1 cloud business system and a sponsor of this show. Smart companies run on NetSuite because it gives you the visibility, control over your financials, your HR, your inventory, your e-commerce, and more. Basically, everything you need all in one place. It lets you manage your company with precision. Whether you're doing $1 million or hundreds of millions in sales, you'll have the agility to compete with anyone, work from anywhere, manage your whole company right from your phone. So join over 20,000 companies who trust NetSuite to make it happen. They actually surveyed hundreds of business leaders, assembling a playbook for free that you can look at the top strategies those companies are using as America reopens for business. So get your free guide, 7 actions businesses need to take now, and schedule your free product tour at netsuite.com/Bannon. That's netsuite.com/Bannon. You're back in the war room on the road at the Trump International Hotel in downtown Washington, D.C. Raheem Kassam, Jack Maxey, and Stephen K. Bannon is back with us on land today. Steve, the first time I ever walked into this ballroom here was about 6 months before the election. The president himself, or the candidate Trump, actually walked a bunch of us around here, and it was a shell. And he said, hey, it's going to be open in a couple of months. It's going to be the biggest, the most beautiful ballroom you've ever seen. And I thought to myself at the time, I thought, nah, there's no way this is going to get pulled together. I mean, it was a shell, but it is absolutely beautiful in here, and they've done such a great job. We're all social distancing here, and the production team and everything has been magnificent.
No, he's pulled it off. It's a magnificent facility. And we really want to thank the people at the Trump International, also the Falkirk Center. It's their Freedom Summit today. This is really to educate the American people, and through our distribution partners, people throughout the world, about the great struggle of the Alliance of Liberty has against the Chinese Communist Party and what the Chinese Communist Party has done to their citizens and now done to people throughout the world. Before we get to, we're going to try to get Miles Guo on the boat to do an interview if we can hook up. But before we turn to Miles, Jack, you've got some additional breaking news?
Well, some interesting things coming out of Hong Kong. They've seen a spike in cases. So starting Wednesday, they are making a ban of more than 2 people getting together. That would constitute an illegal act. Everybody must wear a mask starting Wednesday. and all bars and restaurants are going to close again. Now, this is interesting because
So they're essentially going to another virtual form of lockdown.
Yes, a virtual form of lockdown. It's interesting that they have a thing about 2 people meeting, particularly with all the protests we've seen in Hong Kong. But what's also interesting is you had somebody in the People's Daily this morning said that from now on we will be under constant shadow of the epidemic. Like on rainy days, we have to spare one hand holding the umbrella and continue working using the other hand. So I think that also what we're seeing here with the spike in Hong Kong is this acknowledgement around the world that perhaps this thing is going to be with us for a while, and we're going to have little hot spots come back and forth over time.
I want to turn now. Do we have Miles? Miles, can you hear us on the vessel?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Stephen Kinban. Jack, how are you?
So we're doing great. Thank you for calling on. Listen, Miles, we started the show today with going around the world, from South Korea to Australia to Canada, the United Kingdom, France, and we were able to get actually an interview with Tex from New Zealand about Chinese expatriates, people who are now maybe citizens of these countries. They've gotten citizenship, they've got passports, but they're all protesting. It's a combination of the whistleblower movement, the New Federal State of China, and others. They're all protesting outside of Chinese embassies and Chinese consulates. And what they're saying is that the CCP lied and Americans died, or CCP lied and Australians died, CCP lied and Englishmen died, or the French died. Why is this being driven? When we sit here, we just had Peter Navarro on. When you look at Seattle, you look at Portland, you look at these protests around our country, our media is not pointing the finger to the Chinese Communist Party. We just found out that the Panorama show on BBC is going to have an interview later with a whistleblower. But the mainstream media has not been doing this. It's really come from GTV. It's come from you. It's come from Dr. Peter Navarro, pointing the finger at what the problem is, pointing the finger. So talk to us about why did these demonstrations already happen? We had one take place 4 weeks ago in the United States outside the Chinese embassy. Now it's expanded throughout the world. What is driving these protests, these freedom protests outside Chinese embassies and Chinese consulates throughout the world, with people shouting, the CCP lied, people died, or down with the CCP?
Thank you, sir. I'm really proud of joining the War Room. Today I see you go back to DC. You know, in the Trump President Hotel, as this very beautiful. Also today is a big day in the world. Australia, New Zealand, also Canada, Japan, UK, French, South Korea. Everywhere is the new federal state. We are Chinese, and all the officially Chinese is a protest. Use the Peter Navarro is the slogan. CCP lie is world people die, American people die. That's very powerful, because the Chinese now is very, very important is to face the truth. That's always you and me, we talk. I hope America also can face the truth. Now it's everybody talking coronavirus, but nobody asking coronavirus where from. Everybody talk is how many people get infected, how many people die, but nobody like to ask where from the coronavirus. Who make the coronavirus? Why as America media, all the world media, all the governments don't like to face the truth? Why? That's important. You look at Canada, you look at the UK, you look at the French, you look at South Korea, you look at Japan. All the government, the police try to stop. We are federal states, people go to protests, give the world a try, burn the truth. But it's the CCP is a huge power in any country. Try, is it the police, stop, we are protests. That's a democracy west the world. But now, we can show the world what has happened. CCP lie, the world people die. You how can stop the die? Find out the truth. How can find out the truth? Government need action.
cannot only talk and work, paper and speech, and just say, oh, it's the bureaucracy talk. Please, sir, war room, and you are doing a good job. You risk a lot of people, wake up a lot of people. How can solve the problem? Only one, find out the truth. Where from the coronavirus? Who make the coronavirus? It's from natural, it's from the lamb, it's man-made, it's from the animal. That's easy. American do. Also another side, sir, you know, China, all the problem is from the Cultural Revolution before. Now it talk Pomper Harvard. This is Pomper Harvard. This is a lie. Why is it the propaganda? Also they talk, oh, we are this now, it's maybe somebody starving the people. No, everything is propaganda. They cheated the world. America now have big trouble. Media and Wall Street still control the media, don't want America know the truth. That's American second disaster, sir. Thank you.
Miles, I want to ask you, we have said, Secretary of State Pompeo said, look, the World Health Organization, other people are starting to demand that they get access to these labs, access to these scientists. We now know that Panorama's talking to a scientist. Dr. Yan is around. Hopefully she's going to meet some of the media. You have other defectors we know in Europe. Should the United States and others demand, and what I've been saying is give them 72 hours to give full access to an international consortium that would get access to every scientist, every gain-of-function experiment, every animal species they had there, all the emails, all the communications, everything. They would actually get all access in 72 hours, or the United States would drop the hammer, cut them off from the dollar, sanction the financial institutions, sanction Wang Qishan, General Secretary Xi, sanction all of them, and actually break the Chinese Communist Party until they turn over this information. Because as Mao and Deng Xiaoping said, truth comes from facts. Until we get the facts, we're not going to know the truth. Miles Groh, your comments.
Yes, sir, 100%. I think America need to do this. Even don't do this, America no more time. More people get die, more people get infected. That's 100% correct. They need quickly to action to really, to do. But this is not enough. Dr. Yan come in America is give American spread all the truth about the coronavirus in Hong Kong, P3. What has happened? Also, WHO is the cheater all the people, gave the fake information, cooperated with the PLA, biological weapon army, and is the Wuhan P4, the lamp, all the truth. They see because the whistleblower gave you American the truth, they lose everything. Even now, American government don't do anything. No more people talk about Dr. Yang. What does it have? What is happening in the P3 lamp and the P4 lamp? That's too ridiculous. After this, I think a lot of people get into trial. It's a criminal. You don't work officially, find out the truth. You don't face the truth. You bureaucracy. You don't like face the true information that can kill more American people. That's I like it. 72 hours must be warning. Give the CCP. You must give America what has happened in the P3 Hong Kong the lamp, and what has happened in the Wuhan P4 the lamp. What has happened? Xi Jinping make the decision, any document. And I think America need a red note. 2 is every work in P4, P3, the iceberg must be give all the America all the information. Sir, somebody now in the UK, in the Europe, it's from the army side. They try to give Americans some of the true information from the government. They make the decision. They made the biological weapon because they look American government not seriously think solve the problem. They look at Dr. Yang in America. Nobody respect. Only folks talk 001% the truth. But they don't trust America because America not seriously action. That's the problem. Dr. Yang, in the here. What does happen? What does happen? Give her, show all her half of the data, evidence. What does real happen in the P3 Hong Kong land? The Hong Kong P3 land can be coronavirus. That's why, sir, very important. American, face the truth. Find out the truth.
For 1 second, we got to go to now. I know how Maria.